Picture the endless steppes of Central Asia at dawn. The wind carries whispers across grasslands that stretch beyond the horizon, where ancient stones emerge from earth like forgotten dreams. In the distance, ruins pierce the morning mist, structures so vast and intricate that they seem to belong to another world entirely. This is the land some call Tartaria, a name that appears on old maps spanning continents, yet vanishes from modern textbooks like smoke in wind. What if these empty landscapes once held the most advanced civilization our world has ever known? What if the greatest mystery of human history isn't what we've discovered, but what we've forgotten? The conventional narrative speaks of nomads and empty lands, scattered tribes following herds across barren wastes. But the earth tells a different story. Beneath the soil lie foundations of impossible size, stone blocks fitted with precision that defies explanation, architectural remnants that suggest not wandering peoples, but masters of engineering who shaped the very landscape to their will. From the Ural Mountains to the Pacific shores, from the Arctic tundra to the deserts of Central Asia, traces emerge of something magnificent, something that once was, but now exists only in fragments like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting a lost world. The name Tartaria itself carries an otherworldly quality. Not quite European, not quite Asian, but something beyond our modern understanding of geography and culture. Medieval cartographers marked it as the largest empire on Earth. Renaissance explorers wrote of its wonders. Yet somehow, by the dawn of the 20th century, it had dissolved into footnotes and whispers. Consider the strangeness of this erasure. How does an entire civilization, one that allegedly spanned continents, simply vanish from collective memory? How do maps that once showed Tartarian cities and territories become dismissed as errors or fantasies? The silence itself becomes a mystery more profound than any ancient riddle carved in stone. Perhaps we walk among the remnants without recognizing them. Perhaps the buildings we attribute to other cultures, other times, carry within their foundations the fingerprints of Tartarian builders. Perhaps the technologies we consider revolutionary were once common knowledge in a world that understood harmony between human ambition and natural law. The wind across those distant steppes carries more than dust. It carries questions that challenge everything we think we know about human history. Questions that ask not just what happened, but what was deliberately forgotten. What was hidden? What was lost not to time, but to the careful editing of memory itself? In the shadows cast by crumbling towers, in the geometric precision of ruins half buried by centuries, in the strange silence that surrounds certain chapters of history, something calls to us. A civilization that may have achieved what we still struggle to imagine, true advancement that enhanced rather than destroyed the natural world. This is the mystery of Tartaria, a riddle written in stone and silence, waiting for those willing to question the stories they've been told about the past. Step into any modern library. Pull the heavy volumes of world history from their shelves. Run your fingers along the indexes, searching for Tartaria. You'll find brief mentions, if any fragments describing a vague region inhabited by nomadic peoples. Nothing more substantial than shadows on the edge of accepted knowledge. The mainstream academic world speaks of Tartary with curious indifference. A geographical expression, they claim. A catch-all term for the vast, supposedly empty lands beyond the civilized borders of Europe and China. In their telling, these endless territories held nothing but wandering tribes, their temporary camps leaving no lasting mark upon the earth. Yet this explanation carries an unsettling emptiness. How does one account for the detailed maps of the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries that show Tartaria not as empty wasteland, but as an organized realm with cities, borders, and infrastructure? These cartographers weren't drawing fantasies. They were documenting what travelers reported, what merchants described, what explorers claimed to have witnessed. The silence deepens when you examine the archives themselves. Documents that once described Tartarian culture, government, and achievements seem to have suffered curious fates. Fire claimed some collections. Wars scattered others. Mysterious gaps appear in historical records, as if entire chapters were carefully removed by invisible hands. Consider the work of 19th century encyclopedists. Early editions contain substantial entries about Tartarian peoples, their customs, their territories. But watch how these descriptions shrink with each subsequent publication. Details vanish. Complexity becomes simplification. A rich civilization reduces to footnotes about wandering herders. This editorial evolution follows no natural pattern of scholarly refinement. Instead, it resembles deliberate diminishment, as if each generation of historians received instructions to say less, to remember less, to preserve less of what their predecessors recorded about this mysterious realm. Even more curious is the way modern scholarship handles the contradiction. When pressed about the discrepancy between historical maps and current understanding, academics offer explanations that feel rehearsed. Cartographic errors, they say. Medieval misunderstandings of geography. Yet these same scholars praise the accuracy of period maps when documenting other civilizations. The double standard suggests something deeper than innocent oversight. Why would mapmakers consistently err in depicting one particular region while maintaining accuracy everywhere else? Why would centuries of travelers and chroniclers conspire to invent the same elaborate fiction about Tartarian cities and culture? Perhaps most telling is the absence of investigation itself. Mainstream archaeology shows little interest in exploring sites that might reveal Tartarian origins. Funding flows toward projects that confirm established narratives, while proposals to investigate anomalous ruins in Central Asia gather dust on departmental shelves. The silence extends beyond academia into popular culture. Documentaries explore ancient Egypt, lost Mayan cities, forgotten Mediterranean civilizations, but Tartaria remains conspicuously absent from the roster of mysterious pasts worthy of examination, as if some unspoken agreement keeps this particular mystery locked away from public curiosity. Meanwhile, the evidence of sophisticated construction continues to emerge from the earth itself. Stone foundations of impossible precision. Architectural techniques that surpass the alleged capabilities of nomadic peoples. Complex urban planning that speaks of permanent settlement and advanced engineering knowledge. The disconnect between physical evidence and official explanation creates a void where questions multiply. What interests would benefit from keeping Tartarian history obscured? What revelations might emerge if serious archaeological investigation were permitted in regions once marked as Tartarian territory? The silence itself becomes a form of testimony witness to the power of narrative control over historical memory. In the space between what maps once showed and what textbooks now claim, the ghost of Tartaria persists, waiting for minds willing to look beyond the comfortable boundaries of accepted knowledge. Imagine walking into a cartographer's workshop in 17th century Amsterdam, the air thick with ink and possibility. Here, the finest mapmakers of Europe labor over their charts, incorporating reports from merchants, explorers, and diplomats returning from the farthest reaches of the known world. On their drafting tables, Tartaria sprawls across the largest landmass on Earth, not as empty steppes, but as an empire. Cities dot the interior regions. Borders define territories. Rivers mark trade routes connecting settlements that span from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean. These maps don't depict Tartaria as mysterious or unknown. They show it as an established reality of the political landscape. The Mercator Atlas of 1595 presents Tartaria as one of the world's great powers. The Blaeu Atlas of 1662 details Tartarian provinces with the same precision applied to France or the Holy Roman Empire. These weren't speculative exercises or fantasy cartography. These were working documents used by traders, diplomats, and military planners who needed accurate information to navigate a complex world. What's remarkable is the consistency across different map-making traditions. Dutch cartographers agree with their German counterparts. French maps echo Italian sources. English charts confirm Spanish observations. Despite working independently, separated by rivalries and trade secrets, European mapmakers consistently depicted Tartaria as a vast, organized civilization. The maps reveal internal structure that contradicts nomadic interpretations. Cities appear in logical locations, along rivers, at mountain passes, near resource deposits. Transportation networks connect population centers with the efficiency of planned infrastructure. Borders follow natural geographical features, like the work of sophisticated administrators who understood territorial management. Some charts go further, showing Tartarian territories extending beyond Asia into regions that challenge modern geographical assumptions. Northern routes appear to connect Tartarian lands with territories in what we now call Alaska and even parts of North America. Were these mapping errors or documentation of connections that later history forgot? The quality of detail varies by region, suggesting different levels of contact and knowledge. Areas closest to European trade routes receive precise documentation: city names, provincial divisions, topographical features. More distant territories appear with broader strokes, but still show systematic organization rather than random settlement patterns. Perhaps most intriguing are the maps that show Tartaria's relationship with neighboring powers. Borders with China appear clearly defined, suggesting diplomatic recognition between established governments. Trade routes cross these boundaries at specific points, implying custom systems and commercial treaties. This isn't how mapmakers depicted tribal territories. It's how they documented interactions between sovereign nations. The architectural symbols used on these maps also tell stories. Tartarian cities often appear with distinctive iconography, not the simple symbols used for minor settlements, but elaborate designs suggesting major urban centers. Some maps include architectural drawings that show towers, walls, and public buildings of considerable sophistication. By the 18th century, something begins to change. Maps still show Tartaria, but with increasing uncertainty. Borders become more fluid, city names disappear or change. Details that appeared consistently for centuries start to vary between publishers. It's as if the sources of information were gradually drying up, leaving cartographers to guess at details they once recorded with confidence. The transition from certainty to speculation happens remarkably quickly in historical terms. Maps from 1750 show detailed Tartarian territories. By 1850, the same regions appear largely empty or marked with question marks. Within a century, one of the world's largest mapped civilizations transforms into geographical uncertainty. Modern cartographic historians explain this transformation as the correction of earlier errors. Improved exploration revealed that previous maps had been based on unreliable reports. Yet this explanation raises uncomfortable questions. Why were similar corrections not applied to other regions? Why did European knowledge of Africa, India, and the Americas grow more detailed over the same period while knowledge of Tartaria mysteriously decreased? The maps themselves resist easy dismissal. They're too detailed, too consistent, too professional to be dismissed as fantasy. They represent the accumulated knowledge of centuries of contact, trade, and observation. To accept their testimony requires reconsidering fundamental assumptions about the history of human civilization in the world's largest continent. In the precise lines and careful symbols of these forgotten charts lies perhaps the most compelling evidence for Tartaria as reality documentation created by people who had no reason to invent empires that didn't exist, and every reason to map accurately the world they actually encountered. Dawn breaks over St. Petersburg, illuminating facades that seem to defy their official histories. The Winter Palace stands in Baroque magnificence, its endless corridors and impossibly ornate chambers supposedly built by European architects for Russian Tsars. Yet something in the precision of its construction, the scale of its ambition, the seamless integration of thousands of architectural elements, whispers of capabilities that transcend the technological limitations of its recorded era. Across the Eurasian landmass, similar whispers emerge from stone and mortar, buildings that official chronology attributes to various cultures and periods, yet which share architectural DNA that suggests common origins. Structures whose construction techniques surpass what historians claim was possible for their alleged builders. Consider the Kazan Cathedral in St. Petersburg, ostensibly built in the early 1800s, yet employing construction methods that puzzle modern engineers. The perfect acoustics that allow whispers to carry across vast interior spaces. The mathematical precision of proportions that creates psychological effects of awe and transcendence. The seamless integration of massive stone elements without visible joining techniques. Travel eastward to the monasteries of Tibet, carved into living rock with precision that challenges contemporary understanding of medieval construction capabilities. The Potala Palace in Lhasa rises 13 stories from its mountain foundation, its walls tapered with engineering sophistication that ensures structural stability through earthquakes that have toppled more recent buildings. In Mongolia, the ruins of Karakorum reveal urban planning of startling complexity. Streets laid out in geometric patterns that optimize wind flow and seasonal lighting. Drainage systems that channel mountain runoff with hydraulic principles not officially developed until centuries later. Foundation stones fitted with tolerances measured in millimeters, achieved without machinery that historians claim didn't exist. The mystery deepens with structures that blend architectural traditions in ways that shouldn't be possible given conventional historical timelines. Russian Orthodox churches incorporating Islamic geometric patterns. Buddhist temples using Gothic engineering principles. Mongolian palaces featuring Renaissance proportional systems. Either architectural knowledge crossed cultural boundaries far more freely than Orthodox history suggests, or these diverse traditions emerge from common source. Central Asia holds perhaps the most enigmatic examples. Cities like Samarkand and Bokhara display construction techniques that surpass the capabilities officially attributed to their builders. Dome structures that channel natural air conditioning through principles of thermodynamics. Tile work that creates optical illusions requiring mathematical understanding of visual perception. Structural engineering that has withstood centuries of seismic activity in one of the world's most earthquake-prone regions. The scale alone defies conventional explanations. These aren't modest structures built by small communities over generations. They're massive undertakings requiring coordinated efforts by thousands of skilled workers. Sophisticated supply chains for materials, and central planning that could organize construction projects spanning decades. Modern restoration efforts reveal additional mysteries. Beneath layers of later construction, archaeologists discover original techniques that surpass contemporary capabilities. Stone cutting that achieves molecular-level precision. Metal alloys whose composition remains unidentified. Mortar that bonds more durably than modern cement, while allowing structures to flex with seismic movement. The tool marks on ancient stones tell their own story. Cuts that appear machine precise, yet predate any machinery capable of such accuracy, according to conventional timelines. Surface finishes that require diamond-tipped tools to reproduce, achieved in eras when such implements supposedly didn't exist. Perhaps most puzzling are the acoustic properties built into many structures. Chambers designed to amplify specific frequencies while dampening others. Architectural features that create harmonic resonances with human vocal ranges. Geometric proportions that generate psychological states of contemplation or exaltation through environmental manipulation. These effects weren't accidental. They demonstrate understanding of physics, psychology, and human physiology that Orthodox history claims wasn't available to the civilizations credited with these constructions. Either official timelines dramatically underestimate ancient technological capabilities, Or these structures represent the work of builders whose true identity has been obscured by historical revision. The maintenance requirements alone suggest sophisticated organizational systems. Structures of this complexity require ongoing care by skilled craftspeople who understand their original construction principles. This implies educational institutions that preserved technical knowledge, trade networks that supplied specialized materials, and cultural systems that valued architectural preservation across generations. Yet mainstream archaeology treats each site as an isolated phenomenon, attributable to local cultures, working within accepted historical limitations. The pattern of advanced construction techniques spread across Eurasia receives little systematic study, as if acknowledging the connections might threaten fundamental assumptions about human development. In the shadows cast by these impossible buildings, questions multiply like architectural details themselves. What civilization possessed the knowledge, resources, and organizational capacity to create such structures across such vast distances? What happened to the technical traditions that enabled their construction? Why does official history struggle to account for achievements that stand in plain sight, challenging our assumptions about the capabilities of the past? From the air, they appear like geometric flowers blooming across the landscape of Europe and beyond. Star forts bastioned fortifications with perfectly angled walls radiating outward in mathematical precision. Orthodox military history credits their design to Italian Renaissance engineers. Revolutionary defensive architecture meant to counter the threat of cannon warfare in the 15th and 16th centuries. Yet something unsettling emerges when you map their global distribution. These identical geometric patterns appear simultaneously across continents, in regions that supposedly had no contact with European military innovation. Star forts dot the coastlines of India, the interior of Russia, the frontiers of North America, even remote islands in the Pacific. The official timeline suggests impossible coordination, as if military engineers teleported instantly across oceans to implement identical designs in dozens of different cultures. The Fort de Joux in France exemplifies the puzzle. Its 11-pointed star configuration demonstrates mathematical sophistication that seems to transcend mere military necessity. The angles calculate to optimize not just defensive fire patterns, but acoustic properties that allow communication across vast distances. Underground chambers connect through tunnel systems that follow geometric principles more complex than simple defensive requirements would demand. In Russia, the Peter and Paul Fortress in St. Petersburg displays similar complexity. Built ostensibly in the early 1700s, its design incorporates astronomical alignments that serve no obvious military purpose. The star points orient toward specific celestial coordinates, suggesting the fortress served functions beyond defense, perhaps as part of a larger system designed to interact with natural energies or cosmic phenomena. The mystery deepens with examples found in regions where European military influence seems historically impossible. Star Fort Zachary Taylor in the Florida Keys mirrors European designs with precision that challenges conventional accounts of colonial expansion. Native American territories contain earthwork star formations that predate European contact, yet follow identical geometric principles attributed to Renaissance innovation. Some researchers propose these structures weren't primarily military installations, but components of a global energy grid. The star configuration, they suggest, optimizes the collection and transmission of electromagnetic forces generated by Earth's rotation and magnetic field. The precise angles function as geometric amplifiers, channeling natural energies for purposes modern science has forgotten. This interpretation explains curious features that purely military analysis cannot. Many star forts contain chambers with no apparent defensive function, perfectly circular rooms with acoustic properties that generate harmonic resonances. Underground networks that extend far beyond military necessity, connecting to other structures through tunnel systems that require sophisticated engineering knowledge. The construction techniques also raise questions. stone cutting with molecular precision, foundation work that demonstrates understanding of geological stress patterns, mortar compositions that remain unidentified modern chemistry, yet prove more durable than contemporary materials while allowing structures to flex with seismic movement. Consider the fortress of Suomenlinna in Finland. Its star configuration spans multiple islands, requiring coordination of construction across water barriers using techniques that challenge accepted timelines of engineering capability. The stonework incorporates blocks weighing hundreds of tons, fitted with precision that eliminates gaps large enough to insert paper, achieved supposedly without machinery capable of such accuracy. Perhaps most intriguing are star forts found in locations that contradict their supposed military purpose. Remote mountain valleys where no armies ever campaigned. Island positions that offer no strategic value for conventional warfare. Desert locations far from any military targets worth defending. These placements make sense only if the forts served functions beyond fighting purposes related to their geometric properties rather than their defensive capabilities. The uniformity of design across vast distances suggests centralized planning by an authority with global reach. Yet orthodox history acknowledges no such coordination. European powers supposedly developed star fort technology independently, then coincidentally built identical structures in colonies they had yet to establish, using techniques they had yet to develop. The timeline creates additional problems. Carbon dating of organic materials found in star fort foundations sometimes produces results that predate their official construction by centuries. Either the dating methods are consistently flawed, or these structures represent much older construction traditions that later cultures inherited and misunderstood. Modern military engineers studying these fortifications often express private bewilderment at their sophistication. The geometric calculations required for proper star fort design exceed what most contemporary architects can achieve without computer assistance. Yet historical sources claim these calculations were performed by hand, using mathematical techniques that supposedly didn't exist during the Renaissance. The acoustic properties built into many star forts suggest purposes beyond military communication, chambers that amplify specific frequencies while dampening others, geometric configurations that create standing wave patterns with potential effects on human consciousness, architectural features that seem designed to interact with natural phenomena in ways that pure, defensive structures wouldn't require. In the precise angles and impossible coordination of these geometric fortifications lies perhaps the strongest evidence that official history has overlooked. Connections between seemingly separate civilizations, or that a single advanced culture once possessed the knowledge and authority to implement identical architectural solutions across the entire inhabited world. In the dusty archives of 19th century patent offices, curious inventions gathered digital cobwebs, machines that their creators claimed could harvest energy from the atmosphere itself, pneumatic transportation systems that promised to move people and goods through underground networks spanning continents, free energy devices that supposedly operated without fuel, drawing power from principles that mainstream science claims violate thermodynamics. These aren't the fantasies of modern pseudoscientists, but documented innovations from the era when Tartaria was supposedly fading from maps and memory. What if these seemingly impossible technologies weren't new inventions, but desperate attempts to reconstruct capabilities that a lost civilization had mastered centuries earlier? Consider the atmospheric electricity experiments of Nikola Tesla. His Colorado Springs laboratory demonstrated wireless power transmission across miles of empty space, using principles he claimed to have discovered through study of ancient texts and archaeological sites. Tesla spoke privately of rediscovering rather than inventing, of piecing together fragments of knowledge that once belonged to a more advanced age. The patent records reveal hundreds of similar claims. Inventors across Europe and America filing applications for devices that modern physics insists cannot function. Yet many of these patents include detailed construction drawings, mathematical calculations, and witness testimonies claiming successful demonstrations. Either inventors conspired to perpetrate identical frauds, or they were attempting to reverse engineer technologies whose original principles they didn't fully understand. The pneumatic postal systems that briefly flourished in major cities offer tantalizing glimpses of more ambitious possibilities. Paris, London, Berlin, and New York all implemented tube networks for moving mail and small packages through underground pressure systems. But archived proposals suggest far grander visions: continental networks capable of transporting people at speeds exceeding modern transportation, powered by atmospheric pressure differentials that required no external energy sources. These expanded pneumatic systems never materialized, officially due to cost and technical limitations. Yet the engineering calculations suggest the builders understood principles of fluid dynamics and pressure management that weren't formally developed until decades later. The proposed tunnel networks also demonstrate geological knowledge that seems impossibly advanced for the era-precise understanding of soil composition, groundwater flow, and seismic activity across vast regions. The free energy devices present perhaps the most intriguing mysteries. Patents filed by inventors like John Keely describe machines that supposedly extracted unlimited power from etheric forces or atmospheric vibrations. Keely demonstrated his motors to crowds of witnesses, including skeptical scientists, who testified that his devices operated without any visible power source. Modern attempts to replicate these inventions invariably fail, leading mainstream science to dismiss them as elaborate frauds. Yet the technical specifications often describe construction techniques and material requirements that suggest sophisticated understanding of principles that conventional physics doesn't acknowledge. Either the inventors possessed knowledge that modern science has lost, or they were attempting to recreate technologies whose operating principles they observed but couldn't fully comprehend. The timing of these technological flowering creates additional puzzles. The peak period of atmospheric energy experiments, pneumatic system expansion, and free energy patents coincides precisely with the era when Tartarian territories were supposedly being explored and mapped accurately for the first time. What if this wasn't coincidence, but evidence of recovered technologies being reverse engineered from abandoned Tartarian installations? Some inventors explicitly claimed their innovations derived from studying ruins and artifacts found in remote regions. They spoke of discovering mechanical principles in ancient sites, of reconstructing devices from fragments found in underground chambers, of learning from indigenous peoples who preserved technical knowledge through oral traditions. The suppression of these technologies also follows suspicious patterns. Promising inventions would demonstrate successful operation, attract investor interest, and mysteriously disappear. Patent holders would die unexpectedly, their research materials vanishing from estates and laboratories. Funding would be withdrawn from projects that showed potential for revolutionizing energy production or transportation. Consider the fate of atmospheric electricity research after Tesla's death. His personal papers were seized by government agents, classified for national security reasons that were never explained. Other inventors working on similar principles found their laboratories destroyed by fires, their patents purchased by corporations that immediately shelved the technologies. The pattern suggests systematic suppression of innovation that might threaten existing power structures. But it also resembles efforts to control dangerous knowledge technologies that might be too powerful for societies that hadn't developed the wisdom to use them responsibly. If Tartaria had indeed mastered free energy and advanced transportation, their civilization's collapse might have resulted from technological capabilities that exceeded their cultural maturity. In the forgotten patents and suppressed inventions of the industrial age lies perhaps the clearest evidence that human technological development doesn't follow the smooth progression that official history describes. Instead, it suggests cycles of advance and retreat, periods when lost knowledge briefly resurfaces before disappearing again into the shadows of controlled amnesia. The orphan technologies of the 19th century may represent humanity's last systematic attempt to recover capabilities that once made Tartaria the most advanced civilization. Earth has known knowledge that some force continues to ensure remains safely buried in archives that few dare to explore. Walk through the historic districts of any major European city and notice something curious about the buildings. Basement windows peak above street level. Ground floor entrances require visitors to climb stairs that seem to lead downward into the earth. Storefronts display goods from windows that once opened onto upper floors, now accessible only from what appears to be a second story. The official explanation speaks of gradual urban development, streets rising over centuries as successive generations laid new paving over old. Natural accumulation of debris and soil raising ground levels incrementally. Simple, reasonable, and utterly inadequate to explain the scale of what's actually visible in cities across Europe, Asia, and North America. In St. Petersburg, entire palatial structures show clear evidence of having once stood much taller. What are now basement levels display architectural grandeur that suggests they were originally main floors. Ornate moldings, elaborate ceiling work, and grand proportions designed for public display now sit below ground level, as if some massive event buried the lower portions of the city beneath layers of sediment. The pattern repeats across continents with suspicious consistency. Cities in Russia, Poland, Germany, and France all show identical signs of having been partially buried by some kind of mass sediment deposition. Official archaeology attributes this to gradual processes spanning centuries, yet the evidence suggests something far more dramatic and sudden. Consider the basement levels of Prague. Beneath the modern city lies another complete urban landscape, with streets, squares, and buildings that mirror the surface layout. These aren't ancient ruins slowly buried by time. They are relatively recent structures that appear to have been inundated by a massive mudflow that filled lower levels while leaving upper stories intact. The composition of the buried material tells its own story. Not the mixed debris of gradual accumulation, but uniform sediment that suggests rapid deposition from a single event. Soil analysis reveals mineral compositions that don't match local geology, as if the material came from distant sources and was transported by some mechanism capable of moving massive quantities of earth across vast distances. Photographs from the late 19th and early 20th centuries provide the most compelling evidence. Images of excavation projects in cities across Europe and North America show workers uncovering building facades that extend far deeper than modern ground level would suggest. Entire stories emerge from beneath accumulated sediment, displaying architecture that was clearly designed to be visible above ground. The excavation photos reveal another curious detail. The uncovered building elements show little weathering or decay, despite their supposed centuries of burial. Stonework appears fresh, metalwork remains intact, wooden elements resist the rot that would be expected from prolonged soil contact. The preservation suggests much shorter burial periods than gradual accumulation would require. Some researchers propose that a global catastrophe in the 18th or early 19th century deposited massive amounts of sediment across inhabited regions. This hypothetical event, dubbed the Mud Flood, by alternative historians supposedly buried ground floors of existing cities while leaving upper stories accessible, forcing inhabitants to adapt by treating former second floors as new ground levels. The theory gains credibility from historical anomalies that mainstream archaeology struggles to explain. Construction techniques in recent buildings that surpass contemporary capabilities. Urban planning that seems designed for different geographical conditions than currently exist. Infrastructure systems that make sense only if original ground levels were significantly lower than present elevations. Indigenous oral traditions from North America, Central Asia, and Siberia preserve memories of great deluges that covered the earth with mud rather than water. These stories describe civilizations that were buried rather than drowned, their buildings swallowed by moving earth that flowed like liquid but hardened like stone. The accounts are dismissed as folklore, yet they share specific details across cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. The timing of the alleged mud flood coincides with other historical anomalies. The period when Tartaria was disappearing from maps. The era of massive urban reconstruction projects in major European cities. The years when World's Fairs supposedly showcased incredible architectural achievements that were then mysteriously demolished after brief exhibitions. What if these World's Fair buildings weren't constructed for temporary display, but were actually Tartarian structures that survived the mud flood, were briefly cleaned and repurposed for exhibitions, then deliberately destroyed to eliminate evidence of their true origins? The architectural sophistication of these temporary buildings often exceeded contemporary construction capabilities, yet they were reportedly built in months, then demolished within years. The systematic nature of urban reconstruction in this period also suggests coordinated effort beyond normal city planning. Entire districts rebuilt according to new standards. Infrastructure systems replaced wholesale rather than incrementally improved. Building codes implemented that required specific architectural modifications, changes that make perfect sense if designed to adapt existing structures to new ground levels created by massive sediment deposition. Modern urban archaeology continues to uncover evidence of the mud flood phenomenon. Construction projects routinely discover building foundations extending much deeper than expected. Utility installations encounter structural elements that don't match recorded building histories. Archaeological surveys reveal urban layouts that suggest original construction was designed for different topographical conditions. Yet this evidence receives little systematic study. Academic archaeology focuses on ancient sites while treating recent anomalies as routine construction mysteries. The pattern of evidence points toward a global catastrophe that reshaped inhabited landscapes within recorded history. Yet institutional resistance prevents serious investigation of possibilities that would challenge fundamental assumptions about the stability and continuity of human civilization. In the buried stories of cities around the world lies perhaps the most physical evidence for Tartaria's fate, not gradual decline or military conquest, but sudden burial beneath moving earth that swallowed an advanced civilization and forced survivors to rebuild upon the grave of their former grandeur. In the felt-walled gers scattered across the Mongolian steppes, grandmothers still tell stories that make their grandchildren's eyes widen with wonder and disbelief. Tales of cities that once gleamed like jewels beneath the vast sky, their towers reaching toward the stars, their streets paved with stones that glowed with inner light. According to these whispered traditions, the ancestors lived in harmony with forces that modern people have forgotten how to see. These aren't ancient myths from prehistory, but relatively recent memories preserved in oral tradition. Mongolian elders speak of great-grandparents who claim to remember the final days of the Golden Horde's true power, before the earth itself turned against the cities and swallowed them beneath waves of moving soil. The stories describe advanced technologies that sound like magic to contemporary ears, buildings that heated themselves, vehicles that moved without horses, communication across vast distances without messengers. Travel north into Siberia, and similar stories emerge from indigenous communities that have maintained their oral traditions despite centuries of cultural pressure from Russian expansion. Yakut shamans speak of underground cities where the old people retreat when the surface world becomes too hostile. These subterranean realms supposedly contain preserved knowledge and technologies from the time before the Great Burial, accessible only to those who remember the proper rituals and pathways. The Tungusic peoples preserve perhaps the most detailed accounts. Their creation stories don't begin with the formation of the world, but with its reformation after a great catastrophe that covered advanced civilizations beneath the earth. According to these traditions, modern humanity consists of survivors who were forced to rebuild from scattered remnants, slowly relearning skills that their ancestors had perfected over millennia. These oral histories share specific details that challenge their dismissal as mere folklore. Descriptions of construction techniques that match archaeological discoveries in Tartarian sites. Accounts of governance systems that echo political structures documented in historical sources about Tartarian administration. Technical knowledge of metallurgy, astronomy, and engineering that wouldn't be expected from supposedly primitive nomadic cultures. The shamanic traditions of Central Asia preserve the most intriguing fragments. Practitioners claim to maintain contact with ancestor spirits who lived during the height of Tartarian civilization. Through ritual trance states, these shamans allegedly access memories of advanced urban centers, sophisticated agricultural systems, and technologies based on principles that mainstream science doesn't acknowledge. What makes these accounts particularly compelling is their practical application. Shamans use traditional knowledge to locate underground water sources with accuracy that matches modern geological survey techniques. They predict weather patterns using atmospheric observation methods that meteorologists struggle to replicate. They identify mineral deposits through landscape reading skills that mining companies increasingly consult despite official skepticism. This practical accuracy suggests that oral traditions preserve more than symbolic wisdom. They contain technical knowledge that remains functionally useful centuries after its origins were supposedly lost. If shamanic practices can successfully locate resources and predict natural phenomena, what other information might be preserved in traditions that speak of advanced ancient civilizations? The geographical precision of folk memory also defies explanation through simple storytelling evolution. Mongolian tales describe specific locations where Tartarian cities supposedly stood coordinates that match sites where modern archaeology discovers anomalous ruins. Siberian legends identify mountain passes and river valleys that contain evidence of sophisticated construction projects that official history cannot account for. Indigenous mapping traditions preserve detailed knowledge of landscape features that don't appear on modern charts. Underground river systems, cave networks, mineral formations information that proves accurate when tested by contemporary exploration. These traditional maps also mark locations of sleeping cities and hidden palaces that oral history claims are Tartarian sites waiting to be rediscovered. The linguistic evidence adds another layer of mystery. Many Central Asian languages contain technical terms for concepts and technologies that don't exist in modern culture. Words for specific types of energy manipulation, architectural techniques, and social organizations that suggest complex civilizations far more advanced than nomadic cultures would develop. These linguistic fossils preserve conceptual frameworks for understanding reality in ways that modern languages struggle to express. Perhaps most intriguing are the prophetic aspects of these oral traditions. Many speak of a time when the buried knowledge will resurface, when the hidden cities will reveal themselves, when humanity will remember what it forgot. These prophecies often include specific signs that indicate the approaching revelation celestial events, geographical changes, social transformations that some interpreters claim are already occurring. The shamanic traditions also preserve practical instructions for accessing Tartarian sites, ritual protocols for approaching certain locations, seasonal timings for exploration, collaborative techniques for group excavation. Modern treasure hunters who have followed these traditional guidelines report discovering structural remains and artifacts that don't match the expected archaeology of their regions. Yet academic anthropology treats these oral traditions as cultural curiosities rather than historical sources. The detailed technical information is dismissed as mythological elaboration. The geographical accuracy is explained as coincidental correlation. The practical applications are ignored as irrelevant to serious scholarly investigation. This dismissal reflects deeper assumptions about the nature of historical evidence and the reliability of non-literate cultures. Yet the folk memory of Tartaria, preserved in Central Asian oral traditions, may represent the most direct testimony available about a lost civilization, knowledge maintained by the descendants of survivors who witnessed its glory and its catastrophic end. In the stories told around fires beneath star-filled skies lies perhaps the most human evidence for Tartaria's reality. The persistent memory of peoples who claim their ancestors lived through the rise and fall of the most advanced civilization Earth has known, and who continue to hope that someday the buried cities will rise again from beneath the patient earth. If Tartaria truly spanned continents as historical maps suggest, if it possessed the advanced technologies that artifacts imply, if it built the magnificent structures that still puzzle archaeologists, then where did its people go? The question haunts every investigation into this lost civilization, for while buildings can crumble and technologies can be forgotten, the disappearance of entire populations requires explanations that challenge comfortable assumptions about historical continuity. The demographic scale makes the mystery even more profound. A civilization capable of the engineering feats attributed to Tartaria would have required millions of skilled workers, administrators, craftspeople, and intellectuals. Complex societies don't emerge from small populations. They need vast human resources to sustain the specialization that enables advanced technology and sophisticated culture. Yet by the time European explorers began systematically mapping Central Asia in the 18th and 19th centuries, they found sparse populations of nomadic herders living in territories that maps had recently shown as densely populated imperial provinces. What happened to the city's inhabitants? Where did the builders go? Some researchers propose gradual assimilation as expanding empires absorbed Tartarian territories. The Chinese Empire advancing from the east, the Russian Empire pressing from the west, various Islamic khanates conquering from the south. Perhaps Tartarian populations were slowly integrated into surrounding civilizations, their distinct identity dissolving through intermarriage and cultural absorption. This explanation accounts for political disappearance, but struggles with the archaeological evidence. Assimilation processes typically leave clear traces in the historical record: mixed architectural styles, hybrid technologies, cultural syncretism that demonstrates the blending of different traditions. Yet the transition from advanced Tartarian civilization to the sparse nomadic populations that European explorers encountered shows remarkable discontinuity. The demographic mathematics also create problems. Even assuming massive population transfers, the numbers don't balance. The urban centers that maps show existing in Tartarian territories would have supported populations far exceeding the total numbers that historical sources document for all the neighboring civilizations combined during the relevant time periods. Millions of people don't simply vanish into surrounding societies without leaving demographic traces. Climate change offers another possibility. Central Asia experienced significant environmental shifts during the period when Tartaria was allegedly declining. Cooling temperatures, changing precipitation patterns, and expanding desert regions could have made previously fertile territories uninhabitable, forcing massive migrations that scattered Tartarian populations across continents. The environmental explanation gained support from geological evidence of rapid climate change in Eurasian regions during the 17th and 18th centuries. Ice core samples show sudden temperature drops. Tree ring analysis reveals periods of extreme drought followed by catastrophic flooding. Soil studies indicate massive erosion events that buried agricultural regions beneath layers of wind-blown sediment. Yet climate-driven migration typically creates refugee populations that maintain cultural identity even as they relocate. The Irish potato famine scattered Irish populations across the world, but Irish culture, language, and traditions persisted in diaspora communities. If climate change dispersed Tartarian populations, where are the cultural remnants that such dispersal would have preserved? Perhaps the most disturbing possibility is catastrophic depopulation through pandemic disease. Historical sources document devastating plague outbreaks in Central Asian regions during the alleged period of Tartarian decline. Diseases that killed 90% or more of affected populations were documented in various locations, creating demographic collapses that could account for the transformation of urban civilizations into empty landscapes. The biological warfare interpretation adds another layer of horror to this possibility. If Tartarian civilization possessed technologies that threatened surrounding empires, deliberate plague introduction could have been used as a weapon of mass destruction. Historical precedents exist for intentional disease transmission as military strategy. The practice was documented in European expansion into the Americas and could have been employed against Tartarian populations. Underground survival represents a more hopeful speculation. If global catastrophe threatened surface populations, advanced Tartarian technology might have enabled construction of subterranean cities where populations could survive environmental disasters. Indigenous oral traditions from Central Asia consistently speak of underground civilizations that continue to exist beneath the surface world. Modern geological surveys have identified extensive cave systems and underground chambers in regions that maps once marked as Tartarian territory. Some of these subterranean networks show evidence of artificial construction-worked stone, architectural features, ventilation systems that suggest human engineering rather than natural formation. Could remnant Tartarian populations have retreated into hidden cities, waiting for surface conditions to improve? The genetic evidence remains frustratingly incomplete. Population studies of Central Asian peoples show genetic diversity that suggests complex ancestry combining multiple source populations. However, the specific markers that might identify Tartarian lineages haven't been systematically investigated, partly because mainstream science doesn't acknowledge Tartarian civilization as a distinct entity requiring genetic study. Archaeological excavations in former Tartarian territories sometimes uncover mass burial sites that suggest sudden demographic catastrophe rather than gradual population decline. Bodies interred hastily, without the careful burial practices that characterize normal mortality patterns. Evidence of rapid burial that suggests emergency response to massive die-offs from unknown causes. Perhaps most mysteriously, some researchers claim that Tartarian populations didn't disappear, but were deliberately obscured through systematic historical revision. Identity documents altered, genealogical records destroyed, cultural practices suppressed until entire populations lost connection to their Tartarian heritage. This interpretation suggests that millions of people who consider themselves ethnically Russian, Chinese, or Mongol might actually be descendants of Tartarian populations whose true ancestry was erased through bureaucratic genocide. The question of what happened to Tartarian people remains the most human dimension of this historical mystery. Behind every impressive building, every advanced technology, every sophisticated map were individuals with families, dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. Their fate determines whether Tartaria represents humanity's greatest achievement or its most tragic loss, a reminder that even the most advanced civilizations remain vulnerable to forces beyond their control. The geological record speaks in a language older than human memory, written in layers of sediment, compressed in fossilized remains, carved by forces that reshape continents. In the Eurasian landmass where Tartaria supposedly flourished, the stones themselves bear witness to catastrophic events that mainstream geology acknowledges, but alternative historians interpret differently. Deep beneath the steppes of Central Asia, core samples reveal layers of sediment that tell stories of sudden, violent change. Bands of material that could only have been deposited by massive water movements, floods of continental scale that moved billions of tons of soil, rock, and organic matter across vast distances in relatively short time periods. The uniformity of these deposits suggests synchronized catastrophe rather than localized natural disasters. The Altai Mountains hold perhaps the most dramatic evidence. Geological surveys have identified flood channels carved through solid rock, carved with such force that they dwarf any water movement documented in recorded history. These channels show evidence of flows that would have required water volumes exceeding all current rivers combined, moving at velocities that could reshape landscapes in days rather than millennia. Sediment analysis reveals the cosmic dimension of these catastrophes. Layers containing materials with isotopic signatures that don't match terrestrial sources elements that suggest extraterrestrial impacts or atmospheric events that introduced foreign materials into Earth's environment. The dating of these exotic deposits coincides with periods when Tartarian civilization was allegedly at its height, raising questions about connections between cosmic events and civilizational collapse. The Tunguska event of 1908 provides a modern parallel for the kind of cosmic catastrophe that might have affected ancient civilizations. The explosion flattened 2,000 square kilometers of forest, generated seismic waves detected around the world, and created electromagnetic effects that disrupted communication systems across continents. If similar events occurred during periods of dense human settlement, they could have devastated advanced civilizations while leaving minimal traces in historical records. Ice core evidence from Greenland and Antarctica shows atmospheric anomalies during the period of alleged Tartarian decline. Chemical signatures that indicate massive volcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, or other events that would have altered global climate patterns dramatically and rapidly. These atmospheric disturbances correlate with historical accounts of years without summer, failed harvests, and population movements across Eurasia. The magnetic field data adds another layer of catastrophic possibility. Paleomagnetic studies reveal that Earth's magnetic field underwent traumatic fluctuations during the 17th and 18th centuries periods of rapid pole movement, field strength variations, and electromagnetic instability that could have disrupted technologies dependent on magnetic or electrical principles. If Tartarian civilization had indeed developed advanced electrical technologies, magnetic field instability could have rendered their infrastructure inoperable overnight. Power systems that depended on atmospheric electricity would have failed. Communication networks based on electromagnetic principles would have gone silent. Transportation systems using magnetic levitation or electrical propulsion would have ceased functioning. The biological evidence supports catastrophic rather than gradual environmental change. Fossil pollen analysis reveals sudden shifts in plant populations that indicate rapid climate change transitions that typically require centuries accomplished in decades. Animal populations show similar patterns of sudden disappearance followed by replacement, with different species adapted to changed environmental conditions. Mass extinction events in the geological record demonstrate that sudden global catastrophes are not theoretical possibilities, but documented realities. The Permian-Triassic extinction eliminated 96% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial species in a geological instant. Similar events, though less severe, occurred throughout Earth's history, proving that civilizations dependent on stable environmental conditions remain vulnerable to forces beyond their control. The crater evidence suggests that cosmic impacts continue to threaten Earth's surface. The Barringer crater in Arizona resulted from an impact that occurred within the last 50,000 years. The Tunguska event demonstrates that significant atmospheric explosions occur on timescales measured in centuries rather than millennia. Larger impacts that could devastate continental regions remain statistical certainties over longer time periods. Seismic evidence reveals patterns of earthquake activity in Central Asia that suggest coordinated tectonic instability rather than random geological movement. Fault systems that appear to have activated simultaneously across vast regions, creating earthquake swarms that could have toppled even earthquake-resistant construction within short time periods. The tsunami potential in landlocked regions often goes unrecognized. Yet geological evidence shows that ancient lake systems in Central Asia experienced catastrophic drainage events that created inland tsunamis capable of devastating settlements hundreds of kilometers from water sources. Dam failures, whether natural or artificial, could have generated waves that scoured valleys clean of human habitation. Volcanic activity in the region provides additional catastrophic mechanisms. The Yellowstone supervolcano demonstrates that continental-scale eruptions remain possible, capable of burying vast regions beneath ash while altering global climate patterns. Similar supervolcanic systems exist in Asia, including calderas that show evidence of activity during historical periods. The atmospheric river phenomenon offers another mechanism for the rapid sediment deposition that alternative historians associate with the mud flood. Atmospheric rivers can transport vast quantities of moisture across continents, creating precipitation events that exceed normal weather patterns by orders of magnitude. If such events coincided with other catastrophic factors, they could have generated the massive mud flows that supposedly buried Tartarian cities. Perhaps most intriguingly, some geological evidence suggests that catastrophic events affecting Central Asia followed cyclical patterns, regular intervals that might represent predictable cosmic phenomena rather than random disasters. If ancient civilizations possessed the astronomical knowledge to anticipate such cycles, they might have developed technologies and architectural solutions designed to survive periodic catastrophes. In the patient testimony of stones and sediments lies perhaps the most objective evidence for understanding Tartaria's fate. The geological record cannot be revised by political authorities or suppressed by academic institutions. It preserves the truth about environmental conditions and catastrophic events that shaped the landscapes where advanced civilizations once flourished, offering clues about forces that might have ended the most sophisticated culture in human history. Something extraordinary happened during the 19th century, a transformation so complete that it reshaped not just cities and nations, but human memory itself. Official history describes this as the Industrial Revolution, a period of unprecedented technological progress that lifted humanity from agrarian simplicity to mechanical sophistication. Yet beneath this narrative of advancement lies a pattern of destruction and reconstruction that suggests something far more complex than straightforward progress. Consider the great fires that swept through major cities during this period. Chicago burned in 1871, destroying virtually the entire downtown core. San Francisco burned in 1906, erasing decades of construction. London experienced massive fires throughout the century. These weren't isolated incidents, but part of a global pattern of urban destruction that coincidentally eliminated architectural evidence of previous civilizations. The timing of these fires raises uncomfortable questions. Why did cities that had stood for centuries suddenly become vulnerable to comprehensive destruction? Why did firefighting technology, which had successfully protected urban areas for generations, suddenly prove inadequate against blazes that consumed entire districts? Why did so many fires occur during periods when urban reconstruction was already being planned? The reconstruction that followed these fires demonstrates capabilities that seem to exceed the technological resources officially available. Entire city centers rebuilt in years rather than decades. Architectural projects of stunning complexity, completed with speed that challenges modern construction timelines. Infrastructure systems implemented that required engineering knowledge supposedly not yet developed. The Chicago World's Fair of 1893 exemplifies these puzzling capabilities. Within months of the decision to hold the fair, builders allegedly constructed a white city, covering 600 acres with architectural grandeur that impressed visitors from around the world. The buildings featured advanced electrical systems, sophisticated plumbing, and structural engineering that pushed the boundaries of contemporary possibility. Yet these magnificent structures were reportedly demolished immediately after the fair ended. The official explanation cites fire hazards and temporary construction materials, but photographs show buildings of obvious permanence and quality. Why would architects and engineers invest such effort in creating structures designed for immediate destruction? Why would investors fund construction projects with no intended longevity? The pattern repeats across multiple World's Fairs during this period. Paris, London, Philadelphia, and other cities hosted exhibitions featuring architectural marvels that supposedly represented the pinnacle of contemporary achievement, and systematically destroyed these accomplishments within years of their completion. Either the official timeline drastically underestimates 19th century construction capabilities, or these temporary buildings represented something other than new construction. What if the World's Fair buildings weren't built for the exhibitions, but were existing Tartarian structures that survived whatever catastrophe ended that civilization? The fairs might have served as cover stories for cleaning and temporarily occupying these inherited buildings, before their systematic destruction eliminated evidence of their true origins. This interpretation explains the architectural sophistication that exceeded contemporary capabilities. It accounts for the rapid construction timelines that would have been impossible for genuinely new buildings. It provides motivation for the systematic destruction that eliminated structures of obvious permanence and quality. The industrial development of this period also shows suspicious characteristics. Technologies that allegedly required decades of gradual development appeared suddenly in mature form. Patent applications that described innovations without showing the experimental progression that genuine development would require. Industrial processes that demonstrated mastery of principles supposedly not yet understood. The electrical grid expansion exemplifies this pattern. Within decades, major cities worldwide implemented electrical systems of startling sophistication. Power generation, transmission, and distribution networks that required understanding of electromagnetic principles, materials science, and systems engineering that took modern civilization generations to develop were allegedly designed and implemented by pioneers working with primitive equipment and limited theoretical knowledge. The transportation revolution shows similar anomalies. Railroad networks spanning continents, requiring precise surveying, advanced metallurgy, and complex logistical coordination, were completed with speeds that challenge modern project management capabilities. The engineering accuracy of these early railroad systems often exceeded contemporary standards, despite supposedly inferior technology and mathematical tools. Telegraph and telephone networks demonstrated global coordination that seems impossible given the official timeline of their development. International communication systems that required standardized protocols, synchronized timing, and compatible equipment were implemented across nations that supposedly developed these technologies independently. The level of coordination suggests either impossible coincidence or inherited technical standards from a previous civilization. The demographic changes of this period create additional mysteries. Urban populations grew at rates that exceed immigration and natural increase. Where did these new city dwellers come from? How did rural agricultural societies suddenly produce millions of workers with the technical skills required for industrial occupations? The speed of economic transformation suggests workforce capabilities that don't match the gradual development that official history describes. Perhaps most significantly, this period saw the systematic revision of historical records themselves. Educational systems were standardized, textbooks were rewritten, and curricula were established that created uniform historical narratives across different nations and cultures. Previous diversity in historical interpretation gave way to remarkable consensus about past events, timelines, and civilizational development. This educational standardization coincided with the disappearance of Tartaria from geographical and historical consciousness. Earlier educational materials that acknowledged Tartarian civilization were replaced by textbooks that described the same regions as sparsely populated wastelands. The transition happened rapidly and uniformly, suggesting coordinated effort rather than gradual scholarly evolution. The Great Reset interpretation proposes that the 19th century represented not just industrial development, but civilizational reconstruction following the collapse of a more advanced predecessor society. The fires, the rapid construction, the sudden technological capabilities, and the systematic historical revision all served to eliminate evidence of inheritance while creating narratives of progress and innovation. In this interpretation, modern industrial civilization didn't evolve from primitive beginnings, but was rebuilt from the ruins of Tartarian advancement. The technologies weren't invented, but reverse engineered. The cities weren't developed, but reconstructed. The historical narratives weren't discovered, but manufactured to obscure the true magnitude of what humanity had lost and was desperately attempting to recover. If this interpretation holds truth, then the 19th century represents not humanity's greatest achievement, but its most successful cover-up, a coordinated effort to rebuild civilization while erasing memory of the advanced culture that preceded and enabled the reconstruction. The photographs remain, haunting in their impossibility. Vast architectural complexes stretching beyond the horizon, their domes and spires piercing the sky with mathematical precision. Buildings of such grandeur that they dwarf contemporary construction, featuring engineering sophistication that challenges modern capabilities. Yet according to official records, these magnificent structures were built in months, exhibited briefly, and demolished without trace. The World S. Columbian Exposition of 1893 in Chicago provides perhaps the most documented example of this architectural mystery. The White City covered more than 600 acres with buildings that exhibited structural engineering, electrical systems, and decorative arts of breathtaking complexity. The Palace of Fine Arts alone contained 1.5 million square feet of exhibition space beneath soaring vaulted ceilings that required mathematical calculations modern architects struggle to replicate. Contemporary accounts describe construction timelines that defy credibility. The major exhibition buildings were allegedly designed, built, and finished in less than 2 years. Yet these structures featured innovations that wouldn't become standard practice until decades. Later steel frame construction, advanced electrical lighting, sophisticated plumbing systems, and climate control technologies that required engineering knowledge, supposedly not yet available. The workforce requirements alone challenged the official narrative. The fair's construction allegedly employed 100,000 workers laboring simultaneously on dozens of major buildings. Chicago's total population in 1890 was approximately 1 million, meaning that 1 in 10 residents would have needed construction skills and availability for fair-related work. The logistics of coordinating such a workforce with 1890s communication technology approaches impossibility. The architectural details preserved in photographs reveal sophistication that exceeds temporary exhibition requirements, ornate stonework that would require years to complete, sculptural elements carved with precision that demanded master craftsmen using techniques passed down through generations, decorative systems that demonstrated understanding of proportion, harmony, and aesthetic principles that represented centuries of cultural development. These weren't buildings designed for brief exhibition. Every architectural element suggested permanence foundations that could support structures for centuries, materials selected for durability rather than economy, construction techniques that prioritized longevity over rapid completion. Yet official records insist they were always intended as temporary structures, designed specifically for demolition after the fair's conclusion. The destruction itself raises additional questions. Photographs show workers systematically dismantling buildings of obvious quality and permanence. Architectural elements that could have been preserved for future use were deliberately destroyed. Materials that retained significant value were discarded rather than recycled. The demolition process appears designed to eliminate evidence rather than recover resources. Similar patterns appear at world's fairs across the globe during this period. The Paris Exposition of 1889 featured the Galerie des Machines, an iron and glass structure spanning 420 meters without interior support columns, an engineering achievement that wouldn't be equaled until the mid-20th century. Built allegedly in months, demolished within years despite obvious structural soundness. The 1904 Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis exhibited buildings covering 1,200 acres, with architectural diversity representing dozens of cultural traditions. The Palace of Electricity demonstrated lighting technologies that exceeded contemporary standards. The Palace of Transportation housed vehicles and machinery that seemed decades ahead of their time, all demolished systematically after the fair's conclusion. What connects these exhibitions is not just their architectural impossibility, but their geographical correlation with regions that historical maps once marked as Tartarian territory. The Chicago Fair was built in a location that early maps showed as part of Tartarian North America. The St. Louis Exposition occurred in territories that appeared on Tartarian maps with detailed city locations. The Paris exhibitions happened in a nation whose eastern borders had once touched Tartarian lands. An alternative interpretation suggests these weren't construction projects, but restoration efforts. The World's Fairs provided cover stories for cleaning, repairing, and temporarily occupying Tartarian buildings that had survived whatever catastrophe ended that civilization. The construction timelines make sense if they actually represented renovation of existing structures rather than new building. This interpretation explains the architectural sophistication that exceeded contemporary capabilities. Tartarian builders had created these magnificent structures using advanced techniques and technologies. The fair organizers inherited functional buildings and presented them as examples of contemporary achievement while concealing their true origins and age. The systematic destruction served to eliminate evidence that might challenge official historical narratives. If the public discovered that temporary fair buildings demonstrated capabilities far exceeding officially acknowledged technology, uncomfortable questions would arise about the true source of these architectural achievements. Demolition ensured that physical evidence couldn't contradict manufactured historical timelines. The exhibition contents also suggest inheritance rather than innovation. Many displays featured technologies and artifacts that seemed anachronistic for their supposed time periods. Advanced machinery that demonstrated principles supposedly not yet discovered. Artistic works that showed technical mastery requiring centuries of cultural development. Scientific instruments that exceeded contemporary manufacturing capabilities. Contemporary visitors often commented on the otherworldly quality of these exhibitions. The architecture seemed to belong to a different era, employing aesthetic principles and construction techniques that felt alien to 19th century sensibilities. The electrical illumination created effects that appeared almost magical to audiences familiar with gas lighting and candles. The coordinated nature of fair scheduling also suggests systematic effort, rather than coincidental enthusiasm for international exhibition. Major world fairs occurred at regular intervals during precisely the period when Tartarian territories were being explored and mapped accurately for the first time. The timing suggests these exhibitions served purposes beyond cultural exchange and technological display. Modern attempts to recreate World's Fair architecture consistently fail to match the scale, sophistication, or construction speed documented in historical records. Even with contemporary materials, machinery, and engineering knowledge, reproducing these temporary structures would require years of planning and construction. The official timelines remain impossible using any known construction methodology. In the magnificent buildings that briefly graced World's Fair grounds lies perhaps the most visible evidence that 19th century civilization possessed capabilities that official history cannot account for. Whether through inheritance, reverse engineering, or systematic concealment, the fair organizers demonstrated architectural and engineering mastery that suggests access to knowledge and technologies that transcended their supposed historical limitations. The systematic destruction of this evidence represents one of history's greatest acts of cultural vandalism, a deliberate elimination of architectural achievements that could have advanced human understanding of engineering, aesthetics, and environmental harmony. What was destroyed in the name of temporary exhibition might have been humanity's last direct connection to the building traditions of Earth's most advanced civilization. Open any encyclopedia published before 1900, and Tartaria fills substantial entries describing its peoples, territories, and customs. The 1771 edition of Encyclopaedia Britannica dedicates extensive sections to Tartarian geography, describing organized provinces, established trade routes, and sophisticated governance systems. The 1823 edition expands these descriptions with detailed accounts of Tartarian architecture, agriculture, and technological achievements. Yet watch what happens as successive editions are published. The entries grow shorter, less detailed, more dismissive. Complex descriptions of Tartarian civilization reduced to brief mentions of nomadic tribes. Detailed geographical information disappears, replaced by vague references to empty steppes. By 1950, Tartaria has virtually vanished from encyclopedic consciousness, existing only as a historical footnote about medieval geographical misconceptions. This systematic reduction follows no natural pattern of scholarly refinement. When encyclopedists update entries about ancient Egypt or classical Greece, they typically add information as archaeological discoveries expand knowledge. The Tartarian entries show the opposite pattern-deliberate subtraction of information that previous scholars considered well-established fact. The timing of this editorial revision correlates precisely with the period when Tartarian territories were being incorporated into expanding empires. As Russian, Chinese, and British influences extended into Central Asian regions, academic descriptions of indigenous civilizations became increasingly dismissive. Complex societies transformed into primitive nomads through nothing more than editorial decision-making. Educational curricula show similar patterns of systematic deletion. School textbooks from the early 1800s include geography lessons about Tartarian provinces, their capitals, and their relationships with neighboring nations. History courses describe Tartarian contributions to international trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. These educational materials treat Tartaria as established historical fact requiring no special justification. The transformation of educational content accelerates during the late 19th century. Textbooks published in different nations begin showing remarkable uniformity in their treatment of Central Asian history. The diversity of previous interpretations gives way to consensus narratives that emphasize emptiness, primitiveness, and lack of organized civilization. The coordination suggests deliberate policy rather than independent scholarly evolution. Library collections provide additional evidence of systematic suppression. Inventory records from major European libraries show significant holdings of books, maps, and documents relating to Tartarian civilization throughout the 18th and early 19th centuries. Yet these same libraries today contain few traces of such materials, despite careful preservation of documents from the same periods dealing with other subjects. The disappearance of library materials follows suspicious patterns. Books simply vanish from catalogs without explanation. Maps disappear from collections despite being recorded in multiple previous inventories. Manuscripts are transferred between institutions and somehow lost during the process. The losses concentrate specifically on materials that document Tartarian civilization, while other historical sources from identical periods remain safely preserved. Private collections suffered similar attrition. Estate inventories from 19th century explorers, merchants, and diplomats often list substantial collections of Tartarian artifacts, documents, and artworks. Yet when these estates were liquidated, the Tartarian materials frequently could not be located. Family members report that specific items mentioned in wills or insurance documents had mysteriously disappeared before probate proceedings. The pattern extends to institutional archives. Government departments that maintained correspondence with Tartarian officials, trade records with Tartarian merchants, and diplomatic documents relating to Tartarian territories find these records missing when researchers attempt to access them. The gaps in official archives often coincide with periods when those same governments were actively expanding into former Tartarian territories. Academic careers also show curious patterns related to Tartarian research. Scholars who published papers or books acknowledging Tartarian civilization often found their subsequent work marginalized, their funding reduced, and their career advancement blocked. Universities that had supported Tartarian studies gradually shifted resources toward research that supported colonial narratives about primitive Central Asian peoples. The suppression wasn't limited to written materials. Archaeological expeditions that discovered Tartarian sites often found their findings classified, their publications delayed, and their access to sites restricted. Museums that acquired Tartarian artifacts frequently stored them in basement collections rather than displaying them publicly. When displayed, the artifacts were typically mislabeled, attributed to other cultures, or described as examples of primitive craftsmanship. Photography provides some resistance to this systematic suppression. 19th century photographers documented architectural sites, archaeological discoveries, and cultural practices that contradict official narratives about Central Asian primitiveness. These photographs show sophisticated construction, advanced technologies, and organized societies that challenge colonial-era descriptions of nomadic simplicity. Yet even photographic evidence faces systematic obscuration. Historical photo collections are reorganized, their catalogs revised, and their documentation altered. Images that clearly show Tartarian achievements are recategorized as depicting other cultures or different time periods. The visual record undergoes the same editorial revision as written sources, ensuring that even direct evidence becomes unavailable to researchers. The suppression operates through multiple mechanisms that ensure comprehensive coverage. Legal restrictions limit access to certain archives. Administrative procedures create bureaucratic obstacles for researchers investigating sensitive topics. Academic standards exclude sources that don't conform to established narratives. Economic pressures discourage publication of materials that challenge institutional interests. Perhaps most effectively, the suppression operates through simple neglect. Materials that could illuminate Tartarian history remain uncatalogued in archive basements. Documents written in Central Asian languages lack translation resources. Archaeological sites receive no funding for excavation or study. The absence of active investigation ensures that evidence remains hidden even when technically accessible. Modern digital archives offer hope for recovering suppressed knowledge, but they also face systematic limitations. Digitization projects focus on materials that support established historical narratives while neglecting sources that might challenge accepted timelines. Search algorithms are programmed with keywords that reflect conventional academic priorities, making alternative interpretations difficult to discover. The cumulative effect creates an information environment where Tartarian civilization becomes literally unthinkable. Students encounter no sources that acknowledge its existence. Researchers find no institutional support for investigation. The public receives no media coverage that might stimulate curiosity. The suppression becomes self-reinforcing as each generation has less access to information that could challenge official narratives. Yet the evidence persists in fragments scattered across multiple institutions and private collections. Patient researchers who understand the systematic nature of suppression can still piece together substantial documentation of Tartarian achievements. The knowledge exists, but in dispersed and disguised forms that require dedication and skepticism to recover. In the careful editing of encyclopedias, the mysterious disappearance of library materials, and the systematic marginalization of inconvenient evidence lies perhaps the clearest proof that Tartarian civilization represents more than historical curiosity. The effort invested in suppressing this knowledge suggests that acknowledging Tartarian achievements would challenge fundamental assumptions about human development, colonial history, and the nature of civilization itself. Across the vast landscapes once marked as Tartarian territory, a curious pattern emerges when viewed from sufficient altitude. Ancient structures don't distribute randomly across the terrain, but align with mathematical precision along geometric networks that span continents. Towers, temples, and fortifications positioned at specific intervals, oriented toward precise compass points, connected by straight-line relationships that suggest coordinated planning on a scale that challenges conventional understanding of ancient construction capabilities. The pattern becomes visible when researchers map the locations of anomalous architecture across Eurasia. Stone circles, star forts, cathedral complexes, and mysterious towers that official archaeology attributes to different cultures and time periods suddenly reveal systematic relationships. Distances between sites conform to consistent mathematical ratios. Angular alignments follow geometric principles that optimize specific types of energy transmission. This geometric precision suggests that Tartarian civilization understood principles of planetary energy that modern science has forgotten or suppressed. The structures weren't randomly placed monuments, but components of an integrated system designed to harness, focus, and transmit natural forces generated by Earth's rotation, magnetic field, and interaction with cosmic radiation. The technology would have operated through principles that Tesla researched during his atmospheric electricity experiments. Earth's surface maintains electrical charge differential with the upper atmosphere, creating potential energy that can be harvested using properly designed collector systems. Tartarian towers, positioned at calculated intervals and heights, could have functioned as atmospheric electricity receivers, channeling natural electrical energy through underground transmission networks. The star fort configuration supports this interpretation. The geometric angles that military historians attribute to defensive optimization also represent ideal shapes for electromagnetic energy collection and transmission. The precise mathematics required for proper star fort construction matches calculations needed for efficient electrical resonance systems. These structures might have served dual purposes, protecting energy grid infrastructure while collecting and distributing power. Underground tunnel networks discovered beneath many Tartarian sites provide the transmission infrastructure that such a system would require. These passages often contain evidence of advanced engineering precise construction, ventilation systems, and chamber designs that suggest purposes beyond simple transportation or storage. The tunnels connect sites across vast distances, creating communication and power distribution networks that spanned continents. The architectural materials used in Tartarian construction also support energy grid theories. Many structures incorporate stones with high quartz content, metals with specific conductivity properties, and geometric arrangements that optimize electromagnetic resonance. These material choices make sense for electrical applications, but seem unnecessarily sophisticated for purely aesthetic or defensive purposes. The acoustic properties built into Tartarian architecture provide additional evidence. Many structures generate specific harmonic frequencies when activated by wind, water flow, or human voice. These resonances could have served as components of communication systems that transmitted information across vast distances using atmospheric propagation of sound waves tuned to frequencies that travel efficiently through specific environmental conditions. The mathematical relationships between Tartarian sites match theoretical calculations for optimal energy transmission networks. The spacing intervals correspond to wavelengths that would minimize power loss during atmospheric transmission. The angular alignments optimize collection efficiency for electromagnetic radiation arriving from specific celestial sources. The geometric precision required for such calculations exceeds what conventional history attributes to ancient civilizations. Modern attempts to test energy grid theories encounter systematic obstacles. Archaeological sites receive protection status that prevents experimental investigation. Research funding goes to projects that support conventional interpretations rather than alternative theories. Academic institutions discourage studies that might validate technologies threatening to existing energy industries. Yet some researchers have detected measurable electromagnetic anomalies at Tartarian sites. Magnetic field fluctuations that don't correspond to natural geological sources. Electrical potential differences that suggest ongoing energy collection processes. Atmospheric phenomena that indicate interaction between architectural structures and environmental energy fields. The suppression of Tesla's research provides historical precedent for concealing energy technologies that might destabilize existing power structures. Tesla demonstrated wireless power transmission capabilities that could have revolutionized human civilization. Yet his work was classified and his laboratory destroyed. Similar suppression might have affected Tartarian energy technologies, ensuring that advanced capabilities remained hidden from public knowledge. Indigenous oral traditions preserve memories that support energy grid interpretations. Shamanic practices often center on sites that correspond to former Tartarian locations, using these places for rituals that allegedly tap into earth energies or cosmic forces. Traditional healing practices involve positioning patients at specific locations and orientations that match the geometric alignments that Tartarian builders incorporated into their structures. The global distribution of megalithic sites also suggests ancient energy grid networks that transcended individual civilizations. Stone circles, pyramid complexes, and temple networks on every continent show mathematical relationships that imply coordination by cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. Tartarian civilization might have represented the most sophisticated expression of global energy grid technology. The timing of Tartarian decline correlates with documented changes in Earth's magnetic field during the 17th and 18th centuries. Paleomagnetic evidence shows periods of rapid pole movement and field strength variation that would have disrupted technologies dependent on stable electromagnetic conditions. If Tartarian civilization relied on atmospheric electricity and magnetic field interactions, such changes could have rendered their entire technological infrastructure inoperable. Climate modification represents another application of planetary energy grid technology. By precisely controlling electromagnetic energy distribution across continental regions, advanced civilizations might have influenced weather patterns, agricultural productivity, and environmental conditions. The sudden climate changes that affected Central Asia during Tartaria's decline could have resulted from the failure of technological systems that had previously maintained environmental stability. The energy grid interpretation explains capabilities that conventional archaeology struggles to account for: continental construction coordination, rapid communication across vast distances, and technological achievements that exceed officially acknowledged ancient capabilities. If Tartarian civilization had indeed mastered planetary energy systems, their accomplishments would have surpassed modern technological achievement in ways that official history finds impossible to acknowledge. The systematic suppression of energy grid research might serve to protect economic interests that benefit from humanity as continued dependence on primitive energy technologies. If Tartarian principles could be recovered and applied, they might enable free energy systems that would eliminate the scarcity and control that current power structures depend upon for maintaining social hierarchy. In the precise geometric relationships between ancient sites lies perhaps the most tangible evidence that human civilization once achieved harmony between technological capability and natural law balance that modern humanity has lost but might still recover. Through patient study of the energy grid legacy that Tartarian builders embedded in the landscape itself. In 1962, a Soviet geological survey team working in the remote Sakha Republic of northeastern Siberia discovered something that shouldn't have existed. Hidden beneath centuries of permafrost and vegetation, structural remains emerged that challenged every assumption about the history of human habitation in the Arctic regions. The lead geologist, Dr. Viktor Kedrov, initially mistook the exposed stonework for unusual natural formations. The geometric precision seemed too perfect for ancient construction in such a hostile environment. Yet as his team cleared ice and debris from the site, they uncovered architectural elements that defied explanation. Carved stone blocks fitted with tolerances measured in millimeters, foundation systems that extended deep into permanently frozen ground, and construction techniques that surpassed contemporary Soviet engineering capabilities. The structures appeared to be remnants of a substantial urban complex. Street patterns emerged as the team expanded their excavation area. Building foundations suggested construction on a scale requiring thousands of skilled workers and sophisticated logistical organization. Yet official Soviet archaeology insisted that no civilization capable of such achievements had ever existed in these Arctic wastelands. Dr. Kedrov documented the discovery with meticulous photographs and detailed measurements. The stonework showed evidence of advanced cutting techniques that achieved perfectly flat surfaces and precise angular relationships. Joint systems demonstrated understanding of thermal expansion that allowed structures to flex with extreme temperature variations without losing structural integrity. The engineering sophistication exceeded anything in contemporary Soviet construction practice. The dating evidence presented immediate problems. Organic materials found within the structures suggested construction dates that conflicted with accepted timelines for human development in Siberian regions. Carbon dating results were inconsistent with archaeological expectations, indicating either much older construction than seemed possible or much more recent activity than the site's apparent age would suggest. More disturbing were the technological artifacts that the team discovered within the ruins. Metal objects with compositions that couldn't be identified using available analytical techniques. Crystalline formations that seemed artificially grown rather than naturally occurring. Mechanical components that suggested machinery based on principles that Soviet science didn't recognize. Dr. Kedrov filed his preliminary report through standard academic channels, expecting that the discovery would attract international attention and additional research funding. Instead, his findings were classified by authorities who claimed the site had strategic significance that prevented public disclosure. The excavation was suspended, the site was sealed, and the research team was reassigned to different projects in distant locations. The photographs disappeared from official files. The material samples were transferred to classified research facilities and became inaccessible to civilian scientists. Dr. Kedrov's written reports were removed from academic archives and replaced with geological surveys that described the area as containing only natural rock formations of standard geological origin. Attempts by Dr. Kedrov to publish his findings in international journals were blocked by Soviet censors who claimed that unauthorized disclosure would violate state security regulations. His correspondence with foreign colleagues was monitored and restricted. Academic conferences where he intended to present his research were canceled or moved to locations where his participation was discouraged. The systematic suppression extended beyond individual career pressure. Other Soviet scientists who had worked on similar discoveries in remote Arctic regions reported identical patterns of classification, restriction, and suppression. A network of researchers gradually realized that significant archaeological discoveries were being systematically concealed by authorities, who seemed more interested in hiding evidence than advancing scientific knowledge. Years later, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Dr. Kedrov attempted to return to the site with independent research funding. He discovered that the location had been declared a restricted military zone with access forbidden to civilian researchers. Satellite imagery showed that the excavated areas had been filled with concrete and disguised to match surrounding terrain. The ruins had been deliberately buried and concealed. Modern Russian researchers who have attempted to investigate Dr. Kedrov's claims encounter similar restrictions. The relevant archives remain classified. Funding for Arctic archaeology flows exclusively toward projects that support conventional narratives about gradual indigenous development. Proposals to investigate sites that might reveal advanced ancient construction are rejected on administrative grounds that provide no scientific justification. The few surviving photographs that Dr. Kedrov managed to preserve privately show architectural achievements that seem impossible for the supposed time and place of their construction. Curved stone walls that follow complex mathematical relationships. Ventilation systems that demonstrate understanding of airflow dynamics. Structural elements that suggest building techniques designed for permanent habitation in environments that challenge contemporary Arctic construction. The suppression of Dr. Kedrov's discovery exemplifies systematic patterns that researchers encounter when investigating archaeological sites that might challenge official historical narratives. Evidence is classified, researchers are reassigned, funding disappears, and physical sites are restricted or destroyed. The effort invested in concealing such discoveries suggests that they represent threats to fundamental assumptions about human development and technological capability. Indigenous oral traditions from the region preserve memories that support Dr. Kedrov's findings. Local shamans speak of ancient cities that lie beneath the ice, waiting for the proper time to reveal themselves. These traditions describe advanced peoples who once thrived in Arctic conditions, using technologies that enabled comfort and prosperity in environments where modern civilization struggles to maintain basic survival. The systematic nature of Arctic site suppression raises questions about what other discoveries remain hidden beneath official secrecy. How many archaeological sites that could revolutionize understanding of human history have been classified, concealed, or destroyed? What pattern of advanced ancient construction might emerge if researchers had access to evidence that authorities have systematically hidden? Dr. Kedrov's discovery in the Siberian permafrost might represent just one fragment of a much larger archaeological reality, evidence of advanced civilization in regions and time, periods that official history insists were empty of sophisticated human activity. The lengths to which authorities went to suppress his findings suggest that acknowledging such discoveries would require fundamental revision of accepted historical narratives. In the carefully concealed ruins beneath, Siberian ice lies perhaps the most direct physical evidence that advanced human civilizations once flourished in environments and time periods that conventional archaeology claims were impossible for sophisticated construction discoveries, so threatening to official history that they must be buried, again beneath layers of classification and administrative restriction. On clear nights across the steppes of Central Asia, the stars burn with intensity that urban dwellers never experience. In this vast darkness, ancient structures reveal their deepest secrets, alignments with celestial phenomena that suggest their builders possessed astronomical knowledge rivaling modern understanding of cosmic mechanics. The Arkayam archaeological site in the Ural Mountains exemplifies this sophisticated stargazing legacy. The circular complex, carbon dated to approximately 2000 BCE, functions as a precise astronomical observatory capable of tracking solar, lunar, and planetary movements with accuracy that matches contemporary calculations. The structure's geometry incorporates mathematical relationships that enable prediction of eclipses, seasonal changes, and celestial events decades in advance. Yet Arkayam represents just one node in a network of astronomically aligned sites that span the territories once marked as Tartarian on historical maps. When researchers map these locations and analyze their orientations, patterns emerge that suggest coordinated observation of cosmic phenomena across distances that would have required sophisticated communication and shared mathematical standards. The Gozek Circle in Germany, Stonehenge in England, and Nabta Playa in Egypt demonstrate that ancient civilizations worldwide possessed advanced astronomical capabilities. However, the Eurasian sites attributed to Tartarian builders show systematic sophistication that suggests not just stargazing, but practical application of cosmic knowledge for technological and social purposes. Many Tartarian structures incorporate precise alignment with the constellation Draco, which held the celestial North Pole position approximately 5,000 years ago due to Earth's axial precession. This suggests either much older construction dates than conventional archaeology acknowledges, or preservation of astronomical knowledge that maintained accuracy across millennia of celestial movement. The mathematical precision required for such long-term astronomical accuracy exceeds what historians attribute to ancient civilizations. Calculating precession effects requires understanding of complex trigonometry, multivariable calculus, and observational data collected over centuries. The builders would have needed educational institutions that preserved knowledge across generations and technological tools that enabled precise measurement of celestial positions. The star maps carved into Tartarian stones match modern stellar cartography with precision that challenges explanations based on naked eye observation alone. The position's relative brightness and movement patterns recorded in ancient inscriptions correspond to astronomical data that contemporary scientists verify using sophisticated telescopes and computer calculations. Some Tartarian sites demonstrate awareness of celestial phenomena that are invisible from Earth's surface without technological assistance. Stone carvings that accurately depict the moons of Jupiter, the rings of Saturn, and the phases of Venus suggest access to optical instruments that conventional history claims were undeveloped until the Renaissance period in Europe. The astronomical alignments also served practical purposes beyond calendar keeping and navigation. Many Tartarian structures position their openings, chambers, and architectural features to optimize natural lighting during specific celestial events. The winter solstice might illuminate internal chambers. The summer solstice might create shadow patterns that mark important locations. And planetary alignments might activate acoustic properties that generate harmonic resonances. These applications suggest understanding of connections between cosmic phenomena and terrestrial energy systems. If Earth's electromagnetic field responds to solar radiation, lunar gravity, and planetary positions, properly aligned structures might channel these influences for beneficial purposes: enhanced agriculture, improved health, optimized consciousness states, or amplified technological capabilities. The timing of Tartarian decline correlates with documented changes in Earth's relationship with cosmic phenomena. The Maunder minimum of the late 17th century reduced solar activity dramatically, potentially disrupting technologies that depended on stable electromagnetic conditions. Climate changes associated with reduced solar radiation would have affected agricultural systems that relied on precise seasonal timing. Asteroid and comet impacts also present periodic threats that ancient astronomers might have anticipated and prepared for. If Tartarian civilization possessed accurate long-term astronomical records, they might have predicted cosmic catastrophes and developed architectural solutions designed to preserve knowledge and population through periodic disasters. The astronomical knowledge preservation becomes crucial for understanding how advanced capabilities might survive civilizational collapse. If key information was encoded in architectural alignments, stone carvings, and landscape modifications, future generations could potentially recover technical knowledge by studying the astronomical relationships that ancient builders incorporated into their constructions. Modern attempts to decode Tartarian astronomical information face systematic obstacles. Many sites remain restricted to researchers who might discover evidence of advanced ancient knowledge. Archaeological projects focus on conventional interpretations rather than investigating astronomical applications that might reveal sophisticated technological capabilities. Yet some progress emerges from independent researchers who analyze architectural orientations using contemporary astronomical software. These studies reveal systematic relationships between Tartarian sites and celestial phenomena that suggest coordinated observation and application of cosmic knowledge across vast geographic regions. The precision of these astronomical alignments often exceeds what would be necessary for simple calendar functions or religious observances. The mathematical accuracy suggests practical applications, navigation systems, energy collection optimization, communication coordination, or technological synchronization that required precise timing with celestial events. Indigenous oral traditions preserve astronomical knowledge that supports advanced interpretation of ancient capabilities. Shamanic practices often involve rituals tied to specific celestial configurations, using traditional knowledge that enables prediction of optimal conditions for healing, communication with spirits, or accessing altered consciousness states. The suppression of ancient astronomical research might serve to conceal capabilities that would challenge contemporary scientific and religious institutions. If Tartarian builders had indeed mastered practical applications of cosmic knowledge, their achievements might enable technologies that would revolutionize modern understanding of physics, consciousness, and humanity's relationship with the universe. The recovery of Tartarian astronomical knowledge might also reveal patterns of cosmic influence that affect human civilization in ways that modern science doesn't acknowledge. If celestial phenomena correlate with historical events, technological development, and social transformation, understanding these relationships might enable prediction and preparation for future changes. In the precise alignments between ancient stones and distant stars lies perhaps the most enduring evidence of Tartarian achievement knowledge, encoded in architectural relationships that survived the rise and fall of civilizations, waiting for minds sophisticated enough to recognize the cosmic wisdom that ancient builders embedded in structures designed to communicate with both earth and sky. The conventional boundaries of Tartaria dissolve when researchers examine architectural and technological patterns that span continents. From the precise stone cutting at Sacsayhuaman in Peru to the impossible geometry of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, from the acoustic marvels of ancient amphitheaters to the electromagnetic anomalies surrounding megalithic sites, evidence emerges of construction techniques and mathematical knowledge that suggest coordination by a civilization with global reach. The similarity of advanced construction methods across supposedly isolated cultures challenges fundamental assumptions about ancient development. Polygonal masonry that achieves perfect fits between irregularly shaped stones appears in Inca ruins, Mediterranean Cyclopean walls, and Japanese castle foundations. The technical precision required for such construction exceeds what conventional tools could accomplish. Yet identical techniques manifest in regions that Orthodox history claims had no contact with each other. Consider the mathematical relationships embedded in sacred architecture worldwide. The Great Pyramid of Giza encodes the precise mathematical constant pi in its dimensional ratios. Angkor Wat in Cambodia incorporates the same mathematical relationships in its temple complex geometry. Gothic cathedrals in Europe demonstrate identical understanding of harmonic proportions that create specific acoustic and psychological effects. Either these mathematical principles were discovered independently by dozens of different cultures, or they represent knowledge disseminated by a civilization with global influence. The precision of ancient stonework raises similar questions. Blocks at Pumapunku in Bolivia show machine-like cutting that includes perfectly straight edges, precise right angles, and complex interlocking joints that modern machinery struggles to replicate. Identical precision appears in Egyptian temple construction, Chinese imperial architecture, and Easter Island statuary. The consistency suggests access to technologies that transcended regional capabilities. Underground tunnel systems provide perhaps the most compelling evidence for global civilization. Extensive subterranean networks exist beneath major cities on every continent, from the Cappadocia caves in Turkey to the tunnel systems beneath Beijing, from the catacombs of Paris to the underground cities of the American Southwest. Many of these networks show evidence of ancient construction using techniques that exceed contemporary excavation capabilities. The global distribution of starfort configurations presents another puzzle. These geometrically precise military structures appear simultaneously across continents during time periods when official history insists such coordination was impossible. Identical designs manifest in European fortifications, American coastal defenses, Indian hill forts, and Pacific Island installations. The mathematical sophistication required for proper starfort construction was supposedly developed only once, yet it appears everywhere. Ancient maps provide additional evidence for global coordination. The Piri-Reis map of 1513 accurately depicts Antarctic coastlines that were unofficially discovered until the 19th century. The map shows geographical features that would only be visible if Antarctica were ice-free, suggesting access to information from periods when global climate was dramatically different. Similar maps exist showing detailed knowledge of Pacific Islands, American coastlines, and Arctic territories that Europeans supposedly hadn't yet explored. The navigational accuracy required to create such maps implies understanding of longitude calculation that wasn't officially developed until the 18th century. Yet ancient civilizations apparently possessed knowledge that enabled precise positioning anywhere on Earth's surface. This capability would have allowed coordination of construction projects and communication networks across global distances. Linguistic evidence also suggests ancient global connections. Similarities between languages that developed on different continents indicate contact between cultures that orthodox history claims were isolated. Mathematical and technical terms appear in multiple language families with consistent meanings, suggesting transmission of specialized knowledge across vast distances during ancient periods. The suppression of global civilization research follows patterns similar to Tartarian studies. Archaeological discoveries that might demonstrate ancient global connections receive classification, restriction, or reinterpretation that minimizes their implications. Academic careers suffer when researchers propose theories that challenge assumptions about ancient isolation and primitive capabilities. Yet the evidence persists across multiple disciplines and geographical regions. Astronomical alignments that coordinate sites across continents. Genetic markers that suggest ancient population movements that predate accepted migration timelines. Geological evidence of global catastrophes that could have ended advanced civilizations while leaving scattered remnants that official archaeology misinterprets as independent developments. The timing of alleged Tartarian decline correlates with similar patterns of advanced civilization collapse worldwide. The 17th and 18th centuries witnessed dramatic population changes, environmental catastrophes, and cultural disruptions across multiple continents. Either these represent coincidental local developments, or they reflect the global collapse of an interconnected civilization that official history has fragmented into separate narratives. If Tartarian civilization represented the regional expression of global advanced culture, its technologies and knowledge systems might have operated across continents through communication and transportation, networks that connected Eurasian centers with facilities in Africa, the Americas, and Oceania. The collapse in Central Asia might have triggered systemic failures that affected advanced installations worldwide. The recovery of global Tartarian heritage might require investigating connections between sites and artifacts that conventional archaeology studies in isolation. Patterns that seem mysterious when examined regionally might reveal systematic relationships when analyzed as components of worldwide networks. Technologies that appear impossible for individual ancient cultures might represent capabilities that global civilization had developed and disseminated. Modern attempts to reconstruct global ancient connections encounter resistance from academic, political, and economic institutions that benefit from narratives emphasizing cultural isolation, primitive capabilities, and gradual progress. Acknowledging advanced global civilization would require fundamental revision of assumptions about human development, historical timelines, and technological evolution. The implications extend beyond academic interest to practical applications. If ancient global civilization had indeed developed sustainable technologies, environmental management systems, and social organizations that enabled worldwide coordination without environmental destruction, Their knowledge might provide solutions for contemporary challenges that threaten modern civilization survival. Indigenous oral traditions worldwide preserve memories of advanced ancestors, possessed capabilities that modern humanity has lost. These traditions often describe global connections, advanced technologies, and catastrophic events that ended golden ages of prosperity and wisdom. The consistency of these accounts across cultures suggests historical memory rather than mythological invention. The systematic mapping of global Tartarian heritage might reveal an interconnected ancient civilization whose achievements surpassed modern capabilities in ways that official history finds impossible to acknowledge. If such coordination existed, understanding its principles might enable contemporary humanity to develop technologies and social systems that achieve global cooperation without the environmental and social costs that current civilization imposes. In the scattered evidence of advanced construction, mathematical knowledge, and technological capability that appears on every continent lies perhaps the most revolutionary possibility that Tartarian civilization represented not just a regional power, but the governing system of a global culture that achieves sustainable prosperity through mastery of natural law and cosmic harmony that modern humanity desperately needs to recover. The systematic erasure of Tartarian civilization from historical consciousness represents perhaps the most comprehensive campaign of memory destruction ever attempted. Unlike physical conquest that eliminates populations and structures, this warfare targets knowledge itself, ensuring that even the awareness of what was lost disappears from human understanding. The methodology reveals sophisticated planning that operated across multiple nations and institutions simultaneously. Educational systems worldwide adopted identical revisions to historical curricula during the same time periods. Library collections suffered mysterious losses of materials documenting Tartarian civilization while preserving sources about other ancient cultures. Academic publishing developed editorial standards that excluded evidence supporting alternative historical narratives. The coordination required for such comprehensive suppression exceeded what individual governments or institutions could accomplish independently. The simultaneous revision of encyclopedias, textbooks, maps, and archive catalogs across different nations suggests collaboration by international authorities whose influence transcended political boundaries and cultural differences. The economic dimensions of this memory war become visible through examination of funding patterns for historical research. Projects that investigate conventional narratives about ancient civilizations receive substantial institutional support. Research that might validate Tartarian achievements finds funding mysteriously withdrawn. Proposals rejected without scientific justification, and career advancement blocked through administrative obstacles. The legal framework supporting memory suppression operates through classification systems that restrict access to relevant documents and archaeological sites. Materials that could illuminate Tartarian history receive security classifications that prevent civilian research. Archaeological sites in former Tartarian territories are declared restricted military zones or protected cultural areas where independent investigation is forbidden. The technological tools of memory warfare have evolved with advancing communication systems. Internet search algorithms are programmed to suppress alternative historical content while promoting orthodox narratives. Social media platforms restrict sharing of materials that question accepted historical timelines. Digital archives organize content using keywords and categories that make Tartarian-related information difficult to locate. The psychological aspects of memory suppression operate through cultural conditioning that makes alternative historical possibilities literally unthinkable for most people. Educational systems establish mental frameworks that automatically reject evidence contradicting official narratives. Media representations reinforce stereotypes about ancient civilizations that make advanced capabilities seem impossible. Social pressure discourages curiosity about forbidden historical topics. The generational effects ensure that memory suppression becomes self-reinforcing over time. Each successive cohort of students receives education based on increasingly revised historical content. Teachers who might question orthodox narratives face professional consequences that discourage independent investigation. Academic disciplines develop internal cultures that treat alternative interpretations as professional suicide. The institutional mechanisms create systematic bias throughout the knowledge production system. University departments hire faculty who support conventional interpretations while excluding scholars who might validate alternative theories. Academic journals implement peer review processes that reject papers challenging established historical timelines. Professional organizations ostracize members who publish materials supporting suppressed historical narratives. The destruction of physical evidence represents the most extreme form of memory warfare. Archaeological sites are deliberately damaged or concealed to prevent discovery of artifacts that might validate alternative histories. Museums store inconvenient materials in basement collections rather than displaying them publicly. Private collectors find their holdings of Tartarian artifacts targeted for confiscation or forced sale to institutions that ensure continued suppression. A geographical scope of memory suppression extends across all regions where Tartarian influence might be documented. Sites in Central Asia receive military protection that prevents civilian research. European locations where Tartarian architecture might be identified are restricted to bureaucratic procedures that discourage investigation. American territories that maps once marked as Tartarian become inaccessible through various administrative mechanisms. The temporal dimensions reveal coordinated effort spanning centuries. The systematic revision of historical sources began during the colonial expansion period and continues through contemporary academic practices. Each generation of historians receives training that emphasizes orthodox interpretations while discouraging exploration of alternative possibilities. The continuity suggests institutional commitment that transcends individual careers and political changes. The cultural warfare extends beyond academic suppression to popular consciousness manipulation. Entertainment media portrays ancient civilizations as primitive societies lacking advanced capabilities. Educational documentaries reinforce stereotypes about gradual technological progress that make sudden appearance of sophisticated civilization seem impossible. Science fiction presentations of advanced ancient cultures are labeled as fantasy rather than speculative investigation of historical possibilities. The economic interests supporting memory suppression become visible through examination of industries that benefit from hiding advanced ancient technologies. Energy corporations profit from scarcity-based systems that free energy discoveries would eliminate. Construction companies maintain market advantages when superior ancient building techniques remain unknown. Military contractors sell weapons that advanced peaceful technologies might make obsolete. The religious dimensions of memory warfare target spiritual traditions that preserve knowledge about advanced ancient civilizations. Orthodox religious institutions promote interpretations of history that minimize human technological capabilities while emphasizing divine intervention. Alternative spiritual practices that maintain connections to ancient knowledge are marginalized as primitive superstitions rather than preserved wisdom traditions. The international coordination suggests authority structures that operate beyond national governments and academic institutions. The uniformity of historical revision across different cultures and political systems implies decision-making by entities whose influence transcends conventional institutional boundaries. The scope and persistence of memory suppression campaigns indicate resources and organization that exceed what obvious power structures could accomplish. The resistance to memory warfare operates through preservation of evidence in forms that official suppression cannot easily eliminate. Indigenous oral traditions maintain historical memory despite educational pressure to abandon traditional knowledge. Private collections preserve artifacts and documents despite institutional efforts to control access. Independent researchers continue investigation despite professional and financial obstacles. The ultimate goal of memory warfare appears to be prevention of technological and social recovery that might threaten existing power structures. If Tartarian civilization had indeed achieved sustainable prosperity through advanced technologies and social organizations, public awareness of these possibilities might inspire contemporary movements towards similar achievements. Keeping such knowledge suppressed ensures continued dependence on primitive systems that maintain social hierarchy and resource control. The systematic nature of memory suppression itself provides evidence for the significance of what is being hidden. The resources invested in eliminating Tartarian knowledge suggest that acknowledging this civilization's achievements would have consequences that authorities consider unacceptable. The war against memory reveals, through its very intensity, the revolutionary potential of the historical truths it seeks to destroy. The geological record of Central Asia tells a story of sudden environmental transformation that correlates precisely with the period when Tartarian civilization disappeared from historical maps. Ice core data from the Himalayas shows dramatic temperature fluctuations during the 17th and 18th centuries. Tree ring analysis reveals patterns of extreme drought followed by catastrophic flooding. Soil studies indicate massive erosion events that buried fertile agricultural regions beneath layers of windblown sediment. These environmental changes weren't gradual adaptations that civilizations could accommodate through normal social adjustment. They represented rapid, systematic alterations to climate patterns that had remained stable for centuries. Agricultural systems that had sustained complex societies suddenly faced conditions that made traditional farming impossible. Water sources that had supported urban populations dried up or became contaminated by geological upheavals. The Little Ice Age of the late medieval period created the initial stress that began weakening Tartarian civilization. Shorter growing seasons reduced agricultural productivity across the northern latitudes where Tartarian territories were concentrated. Advancing glaciers made previously habitable regions uninhabitable. Rivers that had served as transportation networks froze for longer periods, disrupting trade and communication systems that connected Tartarian cities. The cooling climate particularly affected the higher latitudes, where some researchers placed the heart of Tartarian civilization. Permafrost expansion made construction and agriculture increasingly difficult in regions where engineering and farming had previously flourished. The growing season shortened to periods too brief for crops that required longer maturation times. Heating requirements for buildings increased beyond what available fuel sources could supply. The Maunder minimum of the late 17th century intensified these climate pressures through reduced solar activity that further decreased global temperatures. The correlation between solar radiation cycles and Tartarian decline suggests that advanced technologies might have depended on consistent electromagnetic conditions that solar variability disrupted. If Tartarian engineering utilized atmospheric electricity or magnetic field interactions, solar minimum conditions would have rendered their technological infrastructure inoperable. The precipitation patterns during this period show additional complexity that challenges simple cooling explanations. Some regions experienced severe droughts that eliminated water sources for irrigation and urban supply. Other areas faced unprecedented flooding that destroyed agricultural terraces and urban infrastructure. The irregular patterns suggest systematic destruction of normal weather systems rather than gradual climate change. Volcanic activity during this period contributed to additional environmental stress through atmospheric effects that reduced solar radiation reaching Earth's surface. Major eruptions in Indonesia, Iceland, and other locations created global cooling effects that persisted for years. The accumulated impact of multiple volcanic events during the same period, when other climate factors were creating cooling trends, produced environmental conditions that could have overwhelmed civilizations adapted to more stable weather patterns. The atmospheric chemistry changes documented during this period suggest environmental conditions that might have affected human health and agricultural productivity in ways that gradual adaptation couldn't accommodate. Increased atmospheric particulates from volcanic activity and cosmic dust could have reduced air quality to levels that caused respiratory disease and reduced life expectancy. Changes in atmospheric pressure and electromagnetic conditions might have affected mental health and social stability. The timing of climate change correlates with documented social upheavals across Eurasia during the same period. Population movements, political instability, and cultural changes that historians attribute to various political causes might actually represent responses to environmental conditions that made previous social organizations unsustainable. If Tartarian civilization depended on environmental stability for its technological and social systems, climate change could have triggered systemic collapse. The geographical distribution of climate impacts helps explain why Tartarian civilization might have been particularly vulnerable to environmental change. The northern latitudes where Tartarian territories were concentrated experienced more severe climate effects than regions at lower latitudes where other civilizations were located. The continental climate patterns of Central Asia amplified global climate trends, creating more extreme conditions than coastal regions experienced. The agricultural implications of rapid climate change could have created cascading effects that undermined complex social systems. Reduced crop yields would have decreased population carrying capacity, forcing migration from regions that could no longer support urban populations. Food shortages would have created social instability that disrupted trade networks and political organizations. Competition for scarce resources would have generated conflicts that prevented coordinated responses to environmental challenges. The technological vulnerabilities of advanced civilization to climate change present paradoxical patterns. While sophisticated technologies might enable better adaptation to environmental challenges, they also create dependencies that make sudden environmental changes more disruptive. If Tartarian civilization relied on technologies that required specific environmental conditions, climate change could have created technological failure that primitive societies would have survived more easily. The preservation of knowledge becomes crucial during climate-driven civilizational collapse. If environmental conditions made normal social institutions unsustainable, maintaining educational and cultural systems that preserve technical knowledge becomes impossible. The loss of institutional memory could have prevented recovery even when environmental conditions improved. Technologies that required specialized knowledge passed down through formal education systems would have been lost when climate change disrupted social institutions. The migration patterns associated with climate change help explain the demographic puzzle of Tartarian population disappearance. Rather than dying in place, populations might have fled to regions with more favorable environmental conditions. However, migration under crisis conditions typically leads to cultural fragmentation as refugee populations integrate with existing societies while losing connection to their original identity. Modern climate research provides analogies for understanding how environmental change might have affected ancient civilizations. Contemporary studies of climate refugee movements, agricultural adaptation failures, and social instability caused by environmental stress demonstrate that rapid climate change can overwhelm even technologically advanced societies. The vulnerability increases when environmental changes exceed the adaptive capacity of existing social and technological systems. The recovery possibilities suggest that climate change might not have permanently eliminated Tartarian capabilities, but rather forced temporary withdrawal from regions that became environmentally unsuitable. If core populations and knowledge preserved in more favorable locations, technological and social recovery might have been possible once environmental conditions stabilized. However, the political changes that occurred during the climate crisis period might have prevented such recovery by eliminating the territorial and social foundations that Tartarian civilization required. The modern implications of climate-driven civilizational collapse provide warnings about contemporary environmental challenges. If advanced ancient civilizations could be eliminated by climate changes less severe than those predicted for current global warming trends. Modern civilization's vulnerability to environmental disruption might be greater than technological optimism suggests. Understanding how climate change affected Tartarian civilization might provide insights for preparing contemporary society for environmental challenges that could threaten current technological and social systems. In the ice cores and tree rings that preserve environmental records of the past lies perhaps the most objective explanation for Tartarian civilization's disappearance, not conquest by enemies or technological failure, but defeat by natural forces that even the most advanced human society cannot ultimately control when environmental change exceeds the adaptive capacity of social and technological systems designed for different climatic conditions. European art from the 16th through 18th centuries preserves curious images of a civilization that official history claims never existed in the forms depicted. Paintings show architectural grandeur in regions that maps marked as Tartarian territory, yet which contemporary accounts described as empty steppes populated only by nomadic herders. These artistic representations create a paradox. Either the artists were depicting pure fantasy, or they had access to visual information about civilizations that written histories were systematically obscuring. The Orientalist paintings of the 17th and 18th centuries show particular fascination with Tartarian themes. European artists who had never traveled to Central Asia created detailed depictions of sophisticated urban centers, elaborate courtly ceremonies, and technological achievements that seemed to exceed what contemporary travelers reported finding in those regions. The precision of architectural details and cultural elements suggests reference sources more substantial than imagination or second-hand reports. Consider the engravings in early European encyclopedias that show Tartarian cities, costumes, and technologies. These illustrations demonstrate knowledge of specific cultural practices, architectural styles, and technological applications that would not be expected if Tartarian civilization was as primitive as contemporary written sources suggested. The artists either had access to detailed documentation that contradicted official accounts, or they were preserving visual records of civilizations that political authorities preferred to minimize. Literary works from this period contain similar anomalies. Medieval European texts describe Tartarian kingdoms with governmental sophistication, technological achievements, and cultural refinement that contrast sharply with later descriptions of the same regions as backward and undeveloped. The literary evolution shows systematic reduction of Tartarian civilization's acknowledged accomplishments over time, suggesting deliberate editorial revision rather than improved knowledge. The travel literature presents perhaps the most telling contradictions. Early European explorers and merchants wrote detailed accounts of Tartarian cities, technologies, and social organizations that demonstrated advanced civilization. Yet later, travelers to the same regions found only scattered nomadic populations and ruins that they attributed to much more primitive cultures. Either the earlier accounts were fabricated, or dramatic changes had occurred that later travelers didn't understand or chose not to acknowledge. Marco Polo's descriptions of Central Asian cities during his 13th century journey describe urban centers of impressive scale and sophistication. He writes of Tartarian capitals with populations exceeding contemporary European cities, featuring architecture and technologies that seemed to surpass what he had observed in China or the Middle East. Yet by the time European exploration intensified in the 18th century, such cities had supposedly vanished without leaving substantial archaeological traces. The cartographic art of this period shows similar evolution. Early maps depict Tartarian territories with detailed urban networks, transportation systems, and territorial boundaries that suggest systematic geographical knowledge. The artistic quality of these maps indicates substantial investment in accurate representation rather than decorative speculation. Yet later, maps of the same regions show increasing emptiness and geographical uncertainty. Russian imperial art contains particularly intriguing examples of Tartarian representation. Court painters created works that showed architectural and cultural elements described as Tartarian, yet which didn't correspond to contemporary Russian territories or populations. These paintings might preserve visual records of Tartarian civilization that Russian expansion had encountered and absorbed, but which official histories preferred to minimize or reattribute to Russian achievement. The architectural illustrations in European technical manuals show another form of preserved Tartarian imagery. Engineering texts from the 17th and 18th centuries include detailed drawings of construction techniques, mechanical devices, and urban planning systems that they attribute to Tartarian sources. These technical illustrations suggest that European engineers were studying and attempting to replicate Tartarian innovations, while official histories were dismissing Tartarian technological capabilities. The theatrical representations of Tartarian themes in European drama provide additional preservation of cultural memory. Plays and operas from this period feature Tartarian characters, settings, and plot elements that demonstrate detailed knowledge of cultural practices and social institutions. The dramatic works either drew from substantial source materials about Tartarian civilization, or they participated in creating elaborate fictional constructions that happened to match other forms of suppressed evidence. The evolution of European attitudes toward Tartarian themes in art reveals systematic change in cultural perception over time. Early artistic works treat Tartarian subjects with respect and fascination, depicting advanced civilization worthy of European attention and study. Later works increasingly present Tartarian themes as exotic primitivism or Oriental fantasy, reflecting changing political attitudes toward Central Asian territories that European powers were beginning to dominate. The preservation of Tartarian imagery in European private collections suggests that visual documentation of this civilization continued to circulate even as public acknowledgement decreased. Wealthy collectors maintained paintings, prints, and decorative objects with Tartarian themes that contradicted official narratives about Central Asian primitiveness. These private collections might preserve visual evidence that official institutions preferred to suppress. The influence of Tartarian artistic themes on European decorative arts creates another form of preserved cultural memory. Textile patterns, architectural ornaments, and craft techniques that European artisans described as derived from Tartarian sources continued to influence European design long after political authorities had begun dismissing Tartarian civilization as mythical or primitive. Modern art historical scholarship shows curious patterns in treatment of Tartarian imagery. Academic analysis tends to dismiss artistic representations of advanced Tartarian civilization as Orientalist fantasy or European projection, rather than investigating whether the imagery might preserve accurate historical information. The scholarly interpretation reflects contemporary assumptions about Central Asian primitiveness that might prevent recognition of preserved evidence. The suppression of Tartarian themes in public art collections mirrors patterns visible in other forms of memory warfare. Museums that once displayed materials with Tartarian attribution have relabeled such works or moved them to storage facilities where public access is limited. The curatorial decisions reflect institutional policies that minimize acknowledgement of advanced Tartarian civilization rather than scholarly judgment about artistic significance. The literary censorship of Tartarian themes shows similar institutional coordination. Academic publishers increasingly reject manuscripts that treat Tartarian civilization as historically significant rather than mythological curiosity. The editorial policies ensure that even preserved artistic evidence receives limited scholarly analysis and public attention. The commercial art market shows continuing fascination with Tartarian imagery despite academic dismissal. Private collectors and dealers maintain active markets for paintings, prints, and decorative objects with Tartarian themes, suggesting popular interest that transcends institutional discouragement. The market persistence indicates cultural memory that resists official suppression. In the paintings, engravings, and literary works that European culture produced during its contact with Tartarian civilization lies perhaps the most accessible evidence that this advanced society existed in forms that official history refuses to acknowledge. The artistic preservation of Tartarian imagery provides visual testimony that complements geographical, architectural, and technological evidence, creating cumulative documentation that challenges fundamental assumptions about the history of human achievement in Central Asia. The phantom empire that haunts European artistic imagination might represent not fantasy or projection, but cultural memory of humanity's greatest civilization images preserved in aesthetic form after political and economic interests had succeeded in erasing Tartarian achievements from official historical consciousness. Imagine a civilization that had solved the fundamental challenges that modern humanity struggles with: desperately sustainable energy, environmental harmony, social cooperation, and technological development that enhanced rather than degraded the natural world. If Tartarian society had indeed achieved such integration between human capability and planetary health, their accomplishments would represent not just historical curiosity, but a roadmap for contemporary survival. The energy technologies that some researchers attribute to Tartarian civilization suggest mastery of principles that contemporary science acknowledges theoretically, but hasn't implemented practically. Atmospheric electricity harvesting, using architectural structures designed to optimize electromagnetic collection, could provide unlimited clean energy without the environmental costs that current power generation imposes. If such technologies once functioned, their recovery might enable energy abundance that eliminates scarcity-based economic systems. The construction techniques evidenced in structures attributed to Tartarian builders demonstrate capabilities that surpass contemporary engineering in crucial ways. Stone cutting with molecular precision, architectural acoustics that create psychological effects, and structural integration with natural forces suggest understanding of physics applications that modern technology hasn't mastered. These capabilities might enable construction that enhances human health and environmental stability rather than depleting resources and generating waste. The urban planning principles that archaeological evidence suggests Tartarian civilization employed might provide solutions for contemporary cities that face unsustainable growth, environmental degradation, and social fragmentation. If Tartarian cities integrated agriculture, industry, and habitation in ways that enhanced rather than competed with natural systems, their design principles might enable urban development that improves rather than degrades environmental conditions. The social organization that would have been required to coordinate Tartarian achievements across continental distances suggests governmental and economic systems that enabled large-scale cooperation without the coercion and conflict that characterize contemporary international relations. If such systems once functioned effectively, understanding their principles might enable global cooperation on challenges like climate change, resource distribution, and technological development. The educational systems that would have preserved and transmitted Tartarian technical knowledge across generations suggest approaches to learning that modern institutions might emulate. If complex engineering, astronomical knowledge, and social cooperation were successfully taught to populations capable of maintaining advanced civilization, their pedagogical methods might improve contemporary education that struggles to prepare students for technological and social challenges. The psychological implications of Tartarian achievement challenge assumptions about human potential and social possibility. If previous civilizations achieved sustainable prosperity through wisdom rather than exploitation, contemporary limitations might represent cultural choices rather than inevitable constraints. Recognition of advanced ancient achievement might inspire confidence that current challenges have solutions that human intelligence can discover and implement. The technological integration that Tartarian civilization might have achieved suggests possibilities for contemporary development that transcends the destructive patterns that threaten modern survival. Instead of technologies that consume resources and generate waste, advanced civilizations might develop systems that enhance natural processes while providing human benefits. Such integration might enable technological development that improves rather than threatens planetary health. The environmental relationships that enabled Tartarian success might provide guidance for contemporary responses to climate change and ecological destruction. If advanced ancient civilizations achieved prosperity while maintaining environmental stability, their methods might demonstrate that human development doesn't necessarily require resource depletion and ecological degradation. Understanding these relationships might enable economic systems that enhance rather than damage natural systems. The astronomical applications that some researchers attribute to Tartarian civilization suggest practical uses for cosmic knowledge that contemporary science treats as purely theoretical. If ancient builders successfully integrated celestial phenomena into technological and agricultural systems, their methods might enable contemporary applications that optimize human activities through coordination with natural cycles and cosmic influences. The consciousness technologies that advanced civilizations might have developed could address contemporary challenges related to mental health, social cooperation, and individual development. If Tartarian builders understood psychological effects of architecture, acoustic environments, and electromagnetic fields, their knowledge might enable design of living spaces that enhance rather than degrade human psychological well-being. The medical applications of advanced ancient knowledge might provide alternatives to contemporary healthcare approaches that treat symptoms while ignoring systemic causes of illness. If Tartarian civilization understood relationships between environmental conditions, electromagnetic fields, and human health, their methods might enable medical systems that prevent rather than merely treat disease. The agricultural techniques that enabled Tartarian populations to thrive in challenging environments might provide solutions for contemporary food security challenges exacerbated by climate change and soil degradation. If ancient civilizations achieved agricultural productivity while enhancing rather than depleting soil health, their methods might enable food production systems that reverse rather than accelerate environmental degradation. The transportation systems that would have connected Tartarian territories across continental distances might provide alternatives to contemporary methods that consume fossil fuels and generate pollution. If ancient civilizations developed transportation that utilized natural energy sources and enhanced rather than damaged landscapes, their technologies might enable mobility systems that improve rather than degrade environmental conditions. The communication technologies that would have enabled Tartarian coordination across vast territories might suggest approaches to information exchange that surpass contemporary digital systems in efficiency and environmental impact. If ancient methods utilized natural electromagnetic phenomena and required no artificial energy sources, they might provide communication alternatives that reduce rather than increase technological dependence. The waste management systems that would have enabled Tartarian cities to maintain environmental health over centuries might provide guidance for contemporary urban development that faces mounting challenges from accumulated waste and resource depletion. If advanced civilizations achieved zero-waste systems through design rather than regulation, their methods might enable urban planning that eliminates rather than manages pollution. The recovery of Tartarian knowledge might require fundamental changes in contemporary approaches to research, education, and technological development. Instead of specialization that fragments knowledge into isolated disciplines, understanding advanced ancient civilization might require integrated approaches that recognize connections between physics, psychology, ecology, and social organization. The implications extend beyond technical applications to philosophical and spiritual dimensions of human development. If Tartarian civilization achieved advanced capability through wisdom rather than mere technological accumulation, their example might suggest paths for contemporary development that enhance human potential while respecting natural law and cosmic harmony. The possibility that humanity once achieved sustainable prosperity through integration with natural forces rather than domination over them offers hope that contemporary challenges represent temporary obstacles rather than permanent limitations. If Tartarian builders once demonstrated that advanced civilization can enhance rather than threaten planetary health, their legacy might provide both inspiration and practical guidance for contemporary civilizations struggling to survive its own technological power. In the evidence of capabilities that surpass contemporary achievement lies perhaps the most important message from Tartarian civilization: proof that human potential extends far beyond current limitations, and that the wisdom to survive and thrive sustainably once existed and might be recovered by minds willing to learn from the greatest teachers in human history, the builders of a lost golden age whose achievements wait to be rediscovered and applied. Across the vast steppes where wind carries whispers of ancient glory, something stirs in the collective unconscious of humanity. The name Tartaria, erased from textbooks and maps deleted from official memory, continues to resurface in the dreams and investigations of those who sense that the story we've been told about our past is incomplete, sanitized, and deliberately impoverished. Perhaps the persistence of Tartarian fascination reflects a deeper recognition and intuitive understanding that human civilization has achieved heights that official history refuses to acknowledge. In the depths of genetic memory, in the unconscious wisdom that connects us to our ancestors, something remembers when humanity lived in harmony with forces that we have forgotten how to see. When our ancestors built with precision we cannot replicate, and when the earth itself was understood as a partner rather than a resource to be exploited. The questions that draw researchers to investigate Tartarian mysteries aren't merely academic curiosities. They emerge from a profound dissatisfaction with narratives that present human development as a steady progression from primitive beginnings to contemporary sophistication. The evidence of advanced ancient capabilities challenges the assumption that we represent the pinnacle of human achievement, suggesting instead that we might be the inheritors of a fallen legacy, struggling to recover wisdom that was once common knowledge. The archaeological anomalies, the architectural impossibilities, the technological orphans, and the systematic suppression of evidence all point toward a conclusion that official institutions find unacceptable. That human history includes chapters of achievement that surpass contemporary capability. The resistance to acknowledging these possibilities suggests that recognizing ancient advancement would undermine fundamental assumptions about progress, development, and the nature of civilization itself. Yet the evidence refuses to disappear entirely. In the precise stonework of impossible structures, in the mathematical relationships encoded in ancient sites, in the astronomical alignments that demonstrate sophisticated cosmic knowledge, in the technological artifacts that shouldn't exist according to accepted timelines, the testimony of human achievement persists despite systematic efforts to suppress it. The global patterns of advanced construction, the coordinated suppression of evidence, and the systematic revision of historical narratives suggest that Tartarian civilization represents more than regional curiosity. The scope of memory warfare deployed against this lost civilization indicates that acknowledging its achievements would have revolutionary implications for understanding human potential, technological possibility, and social organization. If Tartarian builders had indeed mastered sustainable technologies, if their social systems had achieved cooperation without coercion, if their relationship with natural forces had enabled prosperity without environmental destruction, then their example would demonstrate that contemporary challenges have solutions that human intelligence can discover and implement. The possibility that such solutions once existed but were lost provides both hope and urgency for recovery efforts. The spiritual dimensions of Tartarian investigation extend beyond historical research to questions about human purpose and planetary healing. If ancient civilizations achieved integration between human capability and cosmic harmony, their methods might enable contemporary humanity to transcend the destructive patterns that threaten modern survival. The search for Tartarian knowledge becomes a search for wisdom that might enable sustainable prosperity. The psychological implications challenge assumptions about limitations and possibilities. If previous generations achieved capabilities that seem impossible from contemporary perspectives, then current boundaries might represent cultural conditioning rather than natural constraints. Recognition of ancient achievement might liberate human potential that artificial limitations have suppressed. The technological applications of recovered Tartarian knowledge might enable solutions for contemporary challenges that seem intractable within current paradigms. Free energy systems, sustainable construction methods, environmental restoration technologies, and social cooperation systems that once functioned might be recoverable through patient investigation and creative application. The educational implications suggest approaches to learning that might surpass contemporary institutional methods. If Tartarian civilization successfully transmitted complex knowledge across generations while maintaining social stability and technological advancement, their pedagogical systems might provide alternatives to educational approaches that fragment knowledge and discourage integrative thinking. The resistance to Tartarian investigation reveals the stakes involved in historical truth. The systematic suppression suggests that acknowledging ancient advancement would threaten power structures that depend on scarcity, limitation, and controlled technological development. Free energy, sustainable construction, and cooperative social systems would undermine economic models that require artificial scarcity and social hierarchy. Yet the investigation continues despite institutional resistance. Independent researchers, citizen scientists, and curious individuals continue exploring evidence that official institutions prefer to ignore. The persistence of Tartarian fascination demonstrates that human curiosity cannot be permanently suppressed when it encounters mysteries that challenge comfortable assumptions. The internet enables coordination among researchers that traditional academic gatekeepers cannot control. Digital archives preserve evidence that physical institutions might eliminate. Global communication allows investigators to share findings that national educational systems might suppress. The technological tools of the modern world might paradoxically enable recovery of ancient wisdom that institutional authorities prefer to keep hidden. The indigenous traditions that preserve Tartarian memory through oral histories, shamanic practices, and cultural knowledge provide continuity that written suppression cannot eliminate. The elders who maintain connections to ancient wisdom represent living links to civilizations that official history claims never existed. Their testimony complements physical evidence and challenges academic dismissal. The timing of contemporary Tartarian investigation coincides with global challenges that might require the kind of advanced solutions that ancient civilizations allegedly developed. Climate change, resource depletion, social fragmentation, and technological dangers might necessitate wisdom that transcends current approaches. The urgency of contemporary challenges makes recovery of ancient knowledge not just intellectually interesting, but practically essential. The possibility that Tartarian civilization once demonstrated sustainable prosperity provides hope that current limitations represent temporary obstacles rather than permanent constraints. If human intelligence once developed technologies and social systems that enhanced rather than threatened planetary health, then similar achievements might be possible for contemporary civilization willing to learn from ancient wisdom. The echo of Tartarian achievement that refuses to die might represent more than historical curiosity or alternative theory speculation. It might represent humanity's unconscious recognition that we have lost connection to capabilities that previous generations possessed, and that recovering this lost knowledge represents our best hope for transcending the challenges that threaten contemporary civilization's survival. In the persistent fascination with a lost civilization lies perhaps humanity's deepest recognition that we are capable of far more than current limitations suggest that our ancestors achieved heights from which we have fallen. and that the wisdom to build sustainable, prosperous, and harmonious civilization once existed and might be recovered by minds willing to look beyond the comfortable boundaries of accepted knowledge into the infinite possibilities that ancient achievement represents for human potential. The story of Tartaria, whether literal history or symbolic truth, calls to something deep in human consciousness, the memory of what we once were and the hope of what we might become again. If we have the courage to remember, the wisdom to learn, and the dedication to recover the ancient knowledge that waits patiently for its rediscovery in a world that desperately needs the gifts that forgotten civilizations might still offer to their descendants, who dream of returning home to harmony with forces that sustain all life on Earth. If you enjoyed this journey through the mysteries of our forgotten past, consider exploring further into the hidden histories that wait to be discovered. The echo of ancient wisdom continues to call across time, inviting us to remember what we have lost and to recover what we need to survive and thrive in the challenges ahead.